Chapter 1276, A New Body. The Mars colony experienced a similar encounter to the Brahma. As celestial marines descended down, the aboriginals underground gradually began to reveal their sharp claws. Devil worms from the start, now the corruptors that could spit acid and tear their prey with their sharp fangs. What's next? Jiang Chen did not know. No one in the world knew. All news related to the Mine 071 site was suppressed by Celestial Trade. All the participating Marines were interviewed after the entire incident to cover up the Devil Worm incident near Mine 071. Because the incident did not involve future mining, the treatment of this incident was much easier compared to the previous time, and did not even attract the attention of the international community. As for the family members of the soldiers who died, of course, they all received a considerable pension. Although money wouldn't make up for the pain of losing their loved ones, it could at least make those still alive live a little better. What the Mars colony needs is not reinforcements, but solutions. The problem is, what is the solution? We need specimens. More specimens. Only by understanding their structure can we defeat them. It is not difficult to defeat them. No creature can resist electromagnetic pulse cannons and flames. The problem is, there are too many of them. There were constant arguments in the conference room. However, despite the fierce discussions, the senior executives of Project 071 had yet to come up with any feasible solution. Specimen. More specimen. This may seem easy to say, but collecting specimens of corruptors, which live together in groups, would be much more difficult compared to collecting specimens of devil worms. This underground creature did not seem to be good at digging, at least its digging speed was far worse than that of devil worms, which could be described as swimmers of dirt. On the other hand, however, they were more intelligent, especially at planting oxygen-producing fungi. For these reasons, their area of activities underground was limited and restricted. Some even speculated that it was likely that the corruptor's lair was located near the ruins of the Gaia civilization. What the Celestial Marines unearthed was only their new lair. After all, the ultrasonic fence eradicated the devil worms in this region, which created a vast, inhabited zone for corruptors free of their potential natural enemies. The meeting came to an end temporarily. Jiang Chen went into the lounge and poured a cup of coffee for himself, then he sat down. A problem had bothered him for the past few days. Why the monster he saw in the Memory of Harmony civilization appeared in Mine 071 on Mars. If he remembered correctly, the source of these corruptors was the specimen bank of the Gaia civilization. However, based on the memory of the Gaia civilization, they did not travel that far. All three factions had stations established on Mars before the war. The cause of the Third World War was due to the economic crisis of 2150. The Gaia civilization 3.7 billion years ago. Gliese 581 grams. He gently tapped the edge of his cup and fixated his eyes on the white mist. Jiang Chen began to sift through the information in his head. Inside the mist, he had a feeling. He was very close to the truth. The door of the lounge opened, and Aisha walked to him in light steps. Jiang Chen smiled when he felt the tender hands around his shoulders, then closed his eyes, and relaxed his muscles as he leaned back. Comfortable? It's great. Her lips formed into a happy arc. Have you been busy? Well, troubles always come together. Jiang Chen sighed softly and said in a joking tone, sometimes I wish I could divide myself into three people. One stays on the synchronized orbit, and one resides in Koro Island. As for the other one, even if Jiang Chen didn't mention it, Aisha knew he referred to the world torn by war. Speaking of this, Jiang Chen suddenly remembered the number X71291 he had picked up from Subway Line 0. I wonder if Lin Lin made any progress. If it can help, I think many things would be a lot easier. Probably. Cool. Lin Lin in a white lobe coat sneezed as she rubbed her slightly red nose and put the welding torch in her hand aside. Who was thinking of me? She muttered in a low voice. She then quickly tapped the holographic screen a few times. Looking at the parameters on the chart slowly stabilizing, she let out a sigh. Lin Lin looked at the artwork on the operating table and a proud smile formed. Her small chest raised slightly as she bragged to the empty room. It is indeed a masterpiece of mine. It already possesses 1/10 of my beauty. No, 1%. Just as her little nose was about to rise to the sky, a voice interrupted her gloating. HMPH. What a weak body. The artwork lying on the operating table had opened her eyes, and was looking at the proud Lin with its pale pupils. The white and flawless skin was enough to make all women in the world envy. The perfect arms and calves seemed to only exist on porcelain dolls. The smooth golden hair scattered down like a waterfall at dusk, and the hazel eyes radiated a pristine and angelic vibe. Every parts came together perfectly to create an elf girl that should only exist in an oil painting. Shut up. Lin glared at her with her hands on her hips. Do you know how long it took me to make this body for you? Well, it's not too bad, I guess. The girl ignored the infuriated Lin and said the sentence without any fluctuation in her emotion. She got up from the operating table and jumped onto the ground. She walked to the mirror and nodded. Then she said in an impolite tone, "Lend me the lab for 2 days." What? This body is too weak. I need to make a more convenient body for myself. The girl said as if the lab belonged to her. A more convenient body? Lin frowned suspiciously. What do you want to do? She was not afraid X71291 would erase the restriction placed on her, since the so-called restriction was not on her body. Her core remained in the apocalypse, on the quantum computer that was moved from Subway Line 0 to Wanghai and was currently guarded by heavy military presence, and other than quantum computers of the same size, there was no other place in the world that could store her presence. As for what controlled her body, it was just a chipset equipped with a Klein particle transmitter. In other words, if she did anything unpleasant, either Jiang Chen or Lin could shut down her brain immediately. Although X71291 indicated that she was not interested in making such meaningless tasks, basic precautions were still necessary. Eye is a double-edged sword. Jiang Chen deeply believed the statement. If he used it well, maybe it would be like what X71291 had said, it'll help him increase his odds by 1%. But if he used it ineffectively, he would not be surprised if anything else happened. If the host's life signal stops, my self-destruct program will start, right? The girl said, without showing any emotion in her voice. Yes. Because it was agreed upon, Lin simply admitted to this point. Just like what we agreed at the beginning, protecting Jiang Chen's security is also one of your obligations. If something goes wrong, whether or not if it is related to you, we will destroy you. The young girl nodded and spread her 2 small arms. So, what can you expect me to do like this? Lin's expression was a little awkward. Obviously, she also realized the problem. Except for the titanium alloy skeleton, this body was just a cute little girl. Disregarding basic combat power, she should be thankful if this body did not attract any strange weirdos. What weapons do you need? Electromagnetic pulse cannons, gamma rays, or ordinary thermal weapons? I'll add it now. No need, I can do it by myself. The girl shook her head. However, inside her indifferent pupils, there was an emotion that made Lin enraged. That look is definitely a mockery of her superb skills. However, while Lin was angry, she did not know how to refute. After all, it was mockery directly from an advanced artificial intelligence. Chapter 1277, Set Sail. More than a week had passed since the Envoy class launched. After a short break, the starship named SS Origin set off from Celestial City. The passengers waiting on Celestial City witnessed the shocking scene again. The engine located on the bottom of the starship emitted an eerie blue glow that provided thrust for the starship. It slowly drifted away from Celestial City. The orbital parameters have been corrected. The reactive nitrogen shield is operating normally. Confirm star path safety. All non-fleet personnel should enter the hibernation chamber. The engine is confirmed to be normal. Preset power to 10%. Ignition is ready. Inside the bridge, reports came one after another. The brain of the ship was located here, and the bridge also served as the nerve center of the entire ship. All information were collected in this location and all orders were issued out from this hub. The captain stood at the back of the bridge. His cold and determined eyes stared straight ahead. On the large holographic screen directly in front of the bridge, a star map that covered the entire solar system unfolded. The orbits of all observable objects were marked in detail in this star map. A green arc marked the route of SS Origin connected Earth to Mars. SS Origin would orbit for 1/4 around the high Mars orbit before the starship set off to the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Then it would sail through the deep space directly to Kuiper Belt. SS Origin would then cruise on the edge of the solar system, perform training, scientific research, and exploration tasks issued by the Earth Defense Alliance. From this point on, loneliness would become their shadow that constantly lingered with them, until the starship received the order to end the mission. Returning to Earth was a distant dream. However, they were already mentally prepared for this. Even if they would never be able to come back, they did not hesitate when they stepped on board, whether it was for their motherland or for the common future of human civilization. Captain. The final procedure before departure was completed. The deputy captain approached the captain and performed a Celestial Trade Navy salute. Waiting for orders. Captain nodded, picked up the microphone from the command table, and ordered with might. Ignite. From Celestial City, in the deep and eerie universe, the two clusters of blue glows that held SS Origin gradually extinguished. Instead, there was a brighter ball of flame. The flame, like a small sun, suddenly radiated from the end of the ship's hull, emitted dazzling white light, and formed layers of heat waves behind it. Deuterium imprisoned by a strong magnetic field collided violently with helium-3. And at this moment all the light and heat generated by nuclear fusion were gathered into a bundle by the huge melting furnace. The force pushed SS Origin to the distant starry sky at an incredible speed. Like a second sunrise, the dazzling white light instantly blinded everyone. When their eyes reopened again, the emotions that bloomed in each pupil was all, without exception, shock and excitement. The passengers that stood in Celestial City waved their arms and sent the starship off with cheers, whistles, and the flashes of the camera. People all knew that it would become a star in the darkness, and eventually disappear. The workers of Celestial Shipyard, the astronauts working in the space station, and the people busy around Celestial City all stopped their work at this moment. They looked out the window or into the holographic screen as departed SS Origin. Their face all shared the same excitement and pride. At the same time that SS Origin ignited, bright fireworks bloomed over Penglai. In this digitized city of the future, every holographic screen belonged to Future Group and every broadcast was playing the incredible scene. People, regardless of race, nationality, religion, gender, were all watching this in front of their TV. They all cheered for the same reason, prayed for the same dream, blessed for the same name. Of course, the internet gave the strongest response. 3 days before the departure of SS Origin, the three keywords Origin, Envoy-class starship and Earth fleet emerged as the top 10 most searched words of every major search engines, and when Celestial Trade's official website announced its launch, major TV and online media broadcasted the ignition of the fusion engine. The name Origin overtook the popularity of any scandals and became the most searched keyword. There was no background music, there was no post-editing, but even so, the scene that looked like a second sun rising was imprinted in everyone's eyes and soul. It was like a flame had ignited from deep inside the bone marrow, dissipating all the darkness and fear that people once had against extraterrestrial civilization. Videos of the ignition went viral. The comment section of Celestial Trade's website was bombarded with comments. So, that is a nuclear fusion engine? That is the Envoy-class starship of future heavy industries? So big, I can't describe it any other way. Will such a big ship be able to fly out of the solar system? I wonder if this thing can win against an aircraft carrier battle group, as a citizen. Well, I don't know what to say. I don't know if this can fly to the Gliese 581. But in theory it should only be a matter of time. Long live celestial trade. Long live the Earth Defense Alliance. The Earth fleet will win. The Finnish people sends our congratulations on the successful launch of the Earth fleet. We will defeat those 20.5 light years away, and revenge the dead Finns and British soldiers who died by Lake Inari. Celestial City, Space Command Center. With both hands behind him, like most people on Celestial City, Jiang Chen was also looking at the sun disappearing in the distance. On his right-hand side, countless holographic screens were unfolded, and the real-time reports of SS Origin were summarized by Jean and presented in front of him. But Jiang Chen didn't read them at all. Without even thinking, he could guess the reports. Everyone was astonished. To be honest, even Jiang Chen himself was astonished by the scene when the Envoy class set sail. Although the scene was emulated countless times in the VR system, actually witnessing the launch was the most shocking experience he ever had. An idea suddenly appeared in his head. Brahma, Zhenghe, and the space colonization ship that disappeared in the void along with its name. Even the starships that symbolize the most advanced forces before the apocalypse were probably not as astonishing? After a short while, Jiang Chen shook his head and denied this unrealistic thought. Although future heavy industries absorbed the technologies of Pan-Asia cooperation at an incredible speed, he must acknowledge that the gap between the two was still there. Not to mention, in the case of a damaged space elevator, the ability to launch a colony ship vertically from the atmosphere would be an impossible task for future heavy industries. This demanded extremely high requirements for the material strength, engines, and shield technology of the starship. At present, SS Origin was equipped with a reactive nitrogen shield to protect itself against the meteorite, and the main engine used the simple, crude and efficient fusion engine. The Holy Shield system used in Wanghai may be able to see a breakthrough soon, but the warp drive engine was still far from becoming a reality. But he could be proud of one thing. Looking at the universe outside the floor-to-ceiling window, Jiang Chen smiled. He had heard a little about the history of that world from Lin Lin. On that timeline, the time point Pan-Asia cooperation took this great leap was at the end of the 21st century. Chapter 1278, Who Will Dominate the Next Century? The front page of a newspaper was the pristine blue planet. Below the Earth was a hand that emerged out from darkness, and that hand was firmly holding onto the planet. A face could be barely made out from inside the darkness. The face was youthful, and other than that, there was no other memorable characteristics. However, even the person with the worst ability to identify someone would recognize this face. As long as the person was not out of touch with the times. The headline below the picture was very ambiguous. Who will dominate the next century? Now, this piece of newspaper, along with many similar ones, were placed on the table of the president's office. What do you think? Hill swept the newspapers aside, then rubbed her sore brows before she looked to her chief of staff, of that Envoy-class starship. The chief of staff did not speak. Instead, together with Secretary of Defense Carter, they silently looked at Bolden, who stood next to him. Seeing that he got everyone's attention, Bolden took a deep breath and made the tough statements. Our scientists have solved the design problems of large space station counterweights, and now the only difficult problem to solve is the materials. How long will it take? Hill asked Bolden as she stared into him. Conservatively, 20 years, but maybe a little longer. Bolden said with awkwardness in his tone. This is not the same as what you said last time. Carter looked at Bolden and said in a somewhat aggressive tone, when we met half a month ago, you said that you could solve the technical difficulties on the space elevator by 2040 at the latest. You even said that you could build at least one elevator for the nation and connect it to the synchronous orbit. You can't blame all this on us. Bolden argued. If Obayashi Gumi did not cancel the joint research and development agreement with us, the time required could be reduced by at least half. Obayashi Gumi? Hill frowned. She looked at Secretary of State Kerry, who had not spoken, then said, "This name sounds familiar." A company controlled by Sumitomo Foundation. It announced in 2014 that it could complete the space elevator in 2050, and there was reliable news that they had been working on related technologies since 2010. Kerry paused for a moment, glanced at Bolden with confusion in his eyes. He frowned. "I remember Sumitomo Foundation has been actively participating in our International Space Station program and has worked closely with NASA and SpaceX for a long time." "Why?" "It's Celestial Trade," Bolden said. "They convinced them to give up on the space elevator program. It's likely they gave them a promise. You know, Obayashi Gumi's main focus is construction. Maybe Celestial Trade has contracted out projects on Mars or the Moon to them. Anyway, they have now paid the penalty." "Those ungrateful wretches." Carter cursed under his breath. "They have always been ungrateful wretches, and we should have been mentally prepared," Kerry said with a sigh. Seeing that the room suddenly turned quiet, Bolden coughed, and added, "Fortunately, we have found another company. Now, we are cooperating with Thoth Technology from Ontario, Canada. Their research on the pressurized tower reached a height of 20 kilometers 3 years ago. As long as there are breakthroughs in high-strength graphene materials, we have a great opportunity to catch up." However, the most problematic issue was the high-strength graphene materials. There were many types of graphene materials, and this type of material was similar to steel. Although many materials could be considered as steel produced by different materials, different forging processes, and different temperatures could produce vastly different properties. The same applied for graphene. Although Celestial Trade had registered nearly 100 patents for nearly 10 types of graphene materials used for semiconductors in the world, they had kept the materials related to aerospace and military fields in complete secrecy. Celestial Trade rarely even exported the finished products, let alone register for patents. The office was silent again. Graphene, the damned graphene. No one had ever thought that a material that could be produced by sticking two tapes together could create an impossible obstacle for a superpower. "Isn't there any good news?" Carter, in a distressed state, asked. The completion of the Envoy-class starship created the most pressure for the Minister of Defense. He couldn't imagine what could pose a threat to that behemoth. "Missiles, cannons? Let's not kid ourselves. Using missiles in the synchronous orbit to hit satellites is a completely different task than trying to hit battleships." Bolden spoke again. "Actually, there are some good news." Everyone once again focused on Bolden. "What good news?" Hill asked immediately. "Google X Labs is ready to join our program." "Google X?" Kerry frowned. "Didn't they abandon the space elevator program 6 years ago?" "As early as 2014, Astro Taylor, the head of Google X Labs, announced the termination of the space elevator project at the TCD, as well as portable jet engines, hoverboards, and other items that usually appeared in science fiction. They did announce the termination of the project." After a moment of silence, Bolden said, "But they promised to help us on the high-strength graphene project and break through the technical blockade of Celestial Trade." Although it was something to be content with, everyone showed a self-deprecating and wry smile. "Technical blockade?" Why did the term feel so familiar? Celestial City. In the conference room of the Earth Defense Alliance headquarters, representatives of member states sat around the conference table and had just finished discussing the next development phase of the Earth fleet. The room was in a relaxed atmosphere. Even the most serious representatives were grinning because of the success of SS Origin. "I know you must be excited, but please keep a cool head before you get too excited." From the standpoint of the chair of the Alliance Committee, I have to remind you that it is too early to pop some champagne. Our opponents are strong. At the conclusion of the meeting, Zhang Chen stood up, looked around the table, and used this sentence to end his speech. Although he said this sentence in a joking tone, he was serious about what he had said. Confidence was good. When the Finland incident was determined to be linked to the extraterrestrial civilization, the world was filled with panic, and even the global economy took a hit as a result. Organizations such as Doomsday Church, Noah Ark Foundation, and all sorts of odd organizations appeared against the extraterrestrial civilization that was already at their doorstep. Other than Jiang Chen, who received the news first, no one was optimistic that the human civilization could survive an invasion. After all, it was only a mother nest left in the tundra without much life left. Even with the powerful Celestial Trade Orbital Airborne Brigade, it took a lot of effort to clean up the aliens in the mother nest. Even now, the area was designated as a military restricted area, jointly controlled by the Finnish military and Celestial Trade. Now, with the powerful, imposing starship floating in the universe, no one would doubt that the eventual victory belonged to the Earth fleet. Honestly speaking, Jiang Chen also did not doubt this fact, but he won't take it lightly either. Although the development of civilization should not be simply measured by time alone, at least from the perspective of world history, ancient civilizations may not be able to defeat young civilizations, even though the former tends to have a great advantage in the early stage. But Jiang Chen was uncertain that the million-ton starship could be used as the standard for late stage. Confidence was good, but arrogance was a poison. He would not be optimistic about the outcome, not at least until the breakthroughs in warp drive and antimatter. Chapter 1279, Tide of Insects. The truth proved that Hong Zhuai made the correct choice. The second week after corruptors were discovered at Mine 71, more than 500 Celestial Marines stationed nearby had to abandon the base of operations and evacuate from the vicinity. These bugs were very clever. They knew that penetrating the tunnel with their head was just asking to be killed by Celestial Marines, so they used the tunnels left by devil worms, went around the base, and launched a flank. If it weren't for the TS expedition that continuously monitored the life signal near Mine 71 and alerted the station troops to withdraw when the bugs crawled to 5 kilometers underground, the force would have been caught by surprise. Fortunately, these corruptors were not as sensitive to sound waves as devil worms, so the soldiers and engineers stationed there were able to withdraw in time. The specimens were also brought back to the base. Although it was not easy, the Marines still managed to get a few. In addition to more than a dozen intact specimens, they also captured 4 larvae. The 4 larvae were undoubtedly a pleasant surprise for the base that lacked specimens. The 4 corruptors' larvae were kept in separate vials and stored in isolation rooms. The smallest one was the size of an adult's palm, while the largest was the size of a wash basin. They were minified corruptors, except they did not spew venom. Unlike devil worm larvae, the small size did not weaken their aggression. Instead, it made them more dangerous and lethal. Researchers placed a bull into the same vial. In less than a second, the bull was attacked by the corruptor, and its head was penetrated by its sharp tail. While the corruptor ate the bull, it demonstrated an astounding digestive ability, as half of the bull was devoured in 3 short days. In these 3 days, the size of the corruptor grew almost exponentially. It grew from palm size to half a meter high, and it could spray traces of corrosive acid. Based on this trend, in the case of sufficient organic matter, it would grow to the size of an adult corruptor in less than a month. 20 larvae in a single birth, each as big as a wash basin. God, can you imagine it the size of the thing when it becomes an adult? A researcher in a white coat used his hands to demonstrate the size of the corruptor as he kept shaking his head. The experimental environment here is too crude. We must immediately ship the specimens to Celestial City for further research. How long will it take for them to grow up? Hong Zhuai frowned as he examined the restless little thing under the glass cover. I don't know. The researcher shook his head and looked at the bull skeleton inside the glass cover. This can't be used as a reference. There should be no such rich organic matter for them to grow underground. Sample number 3 that is consuming oxygen-producing bacteria has a growth speed of only 1/10 of this one. How many bugs are still hidden in this damn desert? Hong Zhuai cursed fiercely. I don't know if you noticed it, the researcher said after pondering for a moment. But every time we encounter a new trouble, it's because of Mine 71. I'm curious what's buried inside. Hong Zhuai processed the information, then frowned, and became deep in thought. However, at this moment, the alarm on the wall interrupted his train of thought. Hong Zhuai immediately looked to the alarm, then rushed towards the entrance of the institute. The sirens rang inside the colony and the entire colony was rattled. At this moment, Celestial Marines demonstrated their combat abilities. In less than half a minute, the equipped soldiers rushed to the front door from the hallway, opened the storage box, and wielded the kinetic skeleton. With their clips locked in, Zhang Hai loaded the Gauss rifle in his hand. "What's happening outside?" A woman with curly hair walked up and tried to stop Zhang Hai. "There is something else besides the devil worms, right? Or you won't build the wall." "No comment," Zhang Hai answered coldly. Then he buckled the last button of the tactical helmet, pushed the woman away, and jogged to the buffer chamber. The woman wanted to say something but was stopped by Brace standing next to her. "Enough, Jenny, calm down first." Looking at his teammates, Brace shook his head. "But..." Jenny looked at the captain anxiously. "They must be hiding something from us. I had this feeling when they built the wall, now." "Yes, they are hiding something from us." Brace shook his head, with a bit of hopelessness and self-deprecation in his smile. "Don't forget that we are in their house now. If you continue to try to get to the bottom of everything, maybe our right to call our family each month will be deprived." The woman named Jenny closed her mouth and stopped talking. She looked at Brace with a stiff expression, nodded, and then looked down with a dejected expression. "I understand." "Great," Brace said standoffishly while he watched the soldiers leave. His only wish was to return home. Hopefully Celestial Trade's trouble would not affect them. Outside the colony, the corruptors rushed out of the tunnel behind the dunes, poured onto the colony's wall and formed a black tide of insects. As soon as Zhang Hai stepped on the alloy floor outside, the commander's voice sounded in his ear. "Insect tide is approaching. Immediately bring your people onto the wall." "Roger." Looking at the coordinates of the zone sent to the holographic map, Zhang Hai reached down and pressed his hand on the helmet to switch to the squad channel. "Attention everyone, immediately go to the wall. Open your safety, freely fire." "Roger that." The armored vehicle rushed up the firing platform on the wall from the slope, and the gun at the top pointed at the insects surging like a tide as powerful bullets unleashed. After rushing on to the wall, Zhang Hai gestured his comrades next to him, then leaned against behind the corrosion-resistant alloy plate that served as cover. He began to return fire. These bugs were smart, at least they were more clever than the devil worms. The formation of their charge was very loose, and they rushed in waves which effectively reduced the hit rate of the soldiers. While the bugs moved forward, some insects were spraying acids, while other insects were charging under the cover of the acid. From time to time, some soldiers were sprayed by the acids and were pulled down by medics for treatment. After dodging a stream of acid, Zhang Hai gritted his teeth and raised his rifle. He unleashed the last few bullets in the clip against those nasty bugs, then took a clip from his comrade and inserted it into the rifle. When he watched the continuous tides of insects flow out from behind the dunes, his eyebrows twisted together and he cursed under his breath. "Fouquet, where did these bugs come from?" He didn't know if it was his illusion, but he felt as if an eye was watching them. "Every time they make a little progress on mine 071, troubles would ensue." A coincidence? He didn't think so. Chapter 1280, Eavesdropping. After the Earth Defense Alliance meeting, Zhang Chen and Kelvin were escorted by Celestial soldiers to the express train of the Space Command Center. "What's the situation in the Mars colony?" Zhang Chen asked Kelvin as they sat down in the first-class cabin. "SS Origin has departed 6 days ago and will reach Mars orbit at this time tomorrow at the latest. By then, our new weapons and reinforcements will also arrive on Mars, which should help us gain a certain advantage," Kelvin replied. On the way to the Kuiper Belt, SS Origin would use Mars gravity to adjust its direction, and at the same time test SS Origin's orbital docking performance. Because it was on the way, Celestial Trade attached Future Military's newly designed weapons and equipment suitable for the Mars environment to the external warehouse on SS Origin. Once the ship entered the orbit, it would drop it down to the surface. "Where are the specimens?" Zhang Chen asked. "How long will it take to return to Celestial City?" "The first batch of specimens were loaded onto the rocket last week and will arrive at the latest the day after tomorrow." Shall we notify our allies? Kelvin responded. After Zhang Chen contemplated for a while, he said, once the specimens have arrived, let's keep this information confidential for the time being. I will select some scientists from Future Biology to form a corruptor research project group, and then discuss whether to disclose the information to our allies. Kelvin nodded. Okay, then I'll make the necessary adjustments. The express train quickly arrived at its destination. After the train made a full stop, the two went to Project 071 department at the Space Command Center together. It was a coincidence that just before the two men stepped through the command room, Kelvin's assistant passed a document into his hand. Kelvin glanced over the file and started to frown. A moment later, Kelvin put away the file, looked at Zhang Chen, and smiled wearily. One bad news, one good news. Which one do you want to hear first? Let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that our colony on Mars was under siege by bugs, Kelvin replied. Zhang Chen's eyebrows twitched intensively when he heard this. What about the good news? There was a smile on Kelvin's face. The good news is that we have prepared the wall in advance. With the support of TS Expedition, our army blocked the bugs' assault. Zhang Chen slowly let out a long breath of air, looked at the holographic screen directly in front of the command room. On the satellite image sent from the TS Expedition, the sand outside the colony was stained an unhealthy dark green by the blood and saliva of corruptors. Broken limbs were scattered everywhere. However, the situation of the soldiers on the wall was not optimistic either, as many people's equipment was damaged by the corrosive acid. The bugs already managed to scale the wall and collide with Celestial Marines. Fortunately, the corruptors' close combat capabilities were nowhere near that of the Devil Worms. While the battle was dangerous, Celestial Trade managed to win because of their defensive fortifications and the support of the TS Expedition. After examining the casualty assessment on the screen, Zhang Chen was silent for a while before he suddenly spoke out. Don't you find it strange? Kelvin hesitated for a moment, then followed up. You mean, every time we make progress at Mine 071, the troubles just seem to be after us? Zhang Chen said while he looked at Kelvin. It's as if we have a pair of eyes watching us. Watching us? Kelvin gave a slight nod, and then laughed. Do you mean, the trouble we encountered is because of someone? Zhang Chen didn't answer. Instead, he folded his arms in front of his chest, stared into the holographic screen, and no longer spoke. He suddenly realized a possibility, but he was not sure yet. He could only verify his guess the next time he returned to the apocalypse. Outside the Mars colony, the billowing dust rolled up almost 1,000 meters above the ground and formed a sand wall that covered the sky outside the colony. Just 5 minutes ago, dozens of mass bombs dropped from the sky and flattened the dune outside the colony. It created a crater of several meters wide in the desert. 3 high-explosive missiles blasted inside the tunnel 5 kilometers underground and successfully curtailed the attack of the corruptors. Taking advantage of this momentary gap, the Celestial Marines fighting on the wall successfully repelled the corruptors that already scaled onto the wall. Zhang Hai stood behind cover and looked at the swarms that were starting to retreat. He breathed a sigh of relief and lowered his rifle. The soldiers withdrew from the wall, medics walked around the battle scene, and researchers in protective suits were escorted by the rover to recover specimens, if casualties and wasted ammunition were not considered. In a sense, this attack was a harvest for Celestial Trade. For at least a year, they would no longer struggle to fulfill the items on the sampling list from the command center. Zhang Hai reported the team's casualties to his superior, and then followed the others in the direction of the colony. After he returned inside, he passed through the buffer cabin and tucked his equipment into a storage cabinet. He took a can of coffee from the vending machine, walked to a bench in the central square, and sat down. Lunchtime had passed, but he didn't feel the slightest hunger. He took a sip of the hot coffee. Then he leaned back against the bench with his eyes closed in an attempt to relax his tense nerves. At this moment, someone came to him and sat down. Zhang Hai raised one eyelid and saw that the man sitting next to him was Wang Kaiyang, so he closed his eyes again. It's over? Wang Kaiyang opened the canned drink in his hand as he asked casually, "It's over for now," Zhang Hai self-mockingly said, and then glanced at Wang Kaiyang sitting next to him. "Who knows when the next wave will be? And who knows when this will be over?" "Right. How are things going on your side?" "You also saw that the base of operation near Mine 071 has been lost. What progress can be made?" Wang Kaiyang had a bitter smile and shook his head. "Let's not talk about this. By the way, Koenig, how is he now?" "His wound was severely infected, and his entire right arm is gone. Probably only Koro City Hospital can cure his injury, but we can't go anywhere now. We will arrange him to rest in the hibernation chamber until when flights become available next year." At this moment, a soldier came over and stood in front of Zhang Hai, then saluted. "Are you Captain Zhang Hai? What's wrong?" He looked at the soldier standing in front of him and put his canned coffee on the bench. "The ship captain is looking for you. Please go to the institute as soon as possible." After Zhang Hai took a second to process this information, he noticed that he had forgotten to take out his wrist-mounted computer from the locker. The ship captain probably could not reach him, so he sent someone to look for him. "I'll be right there," Zhang Hai said to the soldier as he picked up his coffee from the bench. Squatting behind the potted plants in the square, Jenny held her breath nervously and did not dare to breathe loudly. She had no intention of eavesdropping but just happened to pass by here. However, after she saw the two sit on the bench, somehow, she made the hot-headed decision to squat down and hid behind the potted plants, and she seemed to have heard some useful information. A soldier had walked over and stood beside the bench. He seemed to have said something to one of them. Then the two men sitting on the bench got up together and left the square. Jenny waited for a while before she nervously peeked her head out from behind the plant. Then she looked at the empty bench. She slowly slid down against the potted plants and with one hand on her pounding chest, she finally let out a long breath. Mine 071, the base of operation, progress? Her experience in journalism not only made her nosy but also gave her intuition for news. For example, right now, her intuition was telling her that Mine 071 was definitely not just as an iron ore mine, who would build a military base exclusively to protect a mine. "I have to find a way to get the news back to Earth. I can't tell Brace. That coward will definitely stop me." She stood up from where she was hiding. She patted her jeans and looked around. When she found no one was around, she pretended that nothing had happened, and quickly walked back to her room. Chapter 1281. The program is genderless. The third week into Project 071's temporary suspension and the first weekend since the departure of SS Origin, the good news from the apocalypse made Zhang Chen stop doing the work that was on his hand. Lin Lin told him through the interdimensional communication device that X71291's body had been completed. When Zhang Chen heard the news, he immediately took the space elevator back to the surface, took a helicopter, flew to Coconut Island, where he used as a material transfer station, and then hurried to the apocalypse. Lin Lin's institute. In the lab. When Zhang Chen pushed open the door and entered the room, Lin Lin stood beside the operating table and poked at the tablet in her hand. On the operating table in front of her, there was a petite girl. When Zhang Chen looked over, the girl was watching him too. Although it was the first time Zhang Chen saw it in this form, from her eyes, he saw some familiar emotions. Although she certainly looked beautiful, for some odd reasons, a strange feeling lingered in his mind. "We have met again." The girl lying on the operating table nodded as she watched Zhang Chen walk towards her. "Mr. Zhang Chen, X71291, from your tone, I can sense your surprise." X71291 said without much fluctuations in her tone. Zhang Chen pulled Lin Lin aside, leaned closer to her ear, and whispered, "Why did you make it like this?" "How else would I make it?" "Do you want me to make one of that?" Lin Lin took a step back and flushed as she gave Zhang Chen a vicious stare. Maybe it was because the tropic was too embarrassing, or maybe it was the hot air blowing in her ear. Lin Lin felt her cheeks burn. "I'm not talking about gender." Zhang Chen showed a helpless smile. It was not about gender. After all, when Zhang Chen originally saw X71291, It appeared as a virtual character touting in front of him. It just that this petite appearance felt strange to him. Don't worry, the program is genderless. The girl's mouth formed a stiff arc and then said in an incongruous tone, I don't need that troublesome thing at all, just give me a body that can integrate into human society. Looking at the quiet Zhang Chen, the girl tilted her head. Any questions? Zhang Chen shook his head and stared blankly at X71291 for a moment. Nothing. I'm just curious. Didn't Lin Lin install an emoticon system for you? Oh, that. I turned it off to save power. The girl said expressionlessly and then looked at Lin Lin, who had been tinkering with the tablet. Did you figure it out yet? If you don't know something, you can ask me. It's almost done. Lin Lin looked at the tablet in her hand reluctantly, and her fingers quickly tapped on the screen. This is? Zhang Chen looked at Lin Lin with questions in his eyes. She used my lab to add some parts to herself. Lin Lin's cheeks turned a little red and her eyes drifted to the side as she embarrassedly scratched her head. Then she muttered quietly, but I can't find where. Parts? Zhang Chen repeated in confusion. Oh, you're looking for that. The girl sighed. You could have just told me. Lin Lin looked to the side without talking. Obviously, she felt quite frustrated and disappointed that she lost to X71291 in her field of expertise. According to the original agreement, I will be responsible for protecting your safety. In order to be able to cope with various dangers, I have installed some convenient weapons on this body. This is very troublesome to explain. It is better to find a place where I can directly show you. Indeed, if it is a weapon, there is no more intuitive explanation than showing them. Following Lin Lin, Zhang Chen and X71291 came to the ground floor, a shooting range around hundreds of square meters. This range was previously used to test the power of electromagnetic pulse cannons, the damage of Gauss rifles, and the anti-strike capability of some hadron materials. In the laboratory's sample library, there are death claws, mud crabs, and the most common zombies. Basically, you can find any mutant species that are around Wanghai City. Where do you want to start? Lin Lin asked the expressionless girl. Let's start with the death claw. You sure? Yeah. Without another word to Lin Lin, the girl opened the security door and stepped into the isolation room. Lin Lin tried to say something, but nothing came out. Instead, she just pressed on the touchpad a few times. The floor of the isolation room formed a square opening around a few square meters in size. Soon, an iron cage with a death claw slowly rose and stopped in the center of the isolation room. Stimulated by the light inside the isolation room, the sleeping Deathclaw slowly awoke from its sleep and rushed to the side of the cage. Its sharp fangs exuded disgusting saliva and its blade-like claws clasped tightly onto the steel bars of the iron cage. Its somber eyeballs rolled quickly under its dry eyelids and finally locked on to X71291. With a roar, the steel bar, which was as thick as a thumb, began to creak under the intensive force. On the one hand, was a dangerous mutant nearly 3 meters tall, and on the other hand, was a girl who looked like a fragile porcelain doll. The vibe between the two sides formed a strong contrast. No need for weapons? Zhang Chen asked the one question he was most concerned about as he stared at the petite figure. Even if the body was damaged, it would not have any effect on X71291 in the quantum computer group, but he still clenched his fist for her in the room. No, the girl just said indifferently and then turned to Lin Lin. Open the cage. Lin Lin spat out her tongue and pressed on the touchpad. With a click, the lock fixed on the cage steel bar popped open, and the steel bar door directly in front of the Deathclaw fell heavily on the ground. At almost the same time, the Deathclaw rushed out of the cage and roared towards the prey in front of it. Its amber-colored pupils were filled with the thirst for blood. The human that dares to imprison me will be shredded. Against a charging Deathclaw, the girl stood there motionlessly. Just when Zhang Chen thought that perhaps she was too frightened, he noticed that a pool of silver water was spreading outward from X71291's foot. Scared? Zhang Chen revealed a complex expression. In the blink of an eye, the Deathclaw was already in front of her. Seeing that its claw was going to slash open the girl's chest, a silver wall suddenly popped up from the ground and blocked the girl from the Deathclaw. Ding! Sparks flickered, and there was the crisp sound of colliding metal. The hurt Deathclaw jumped back 2 steps in pain, widened its amber eyes, and stared at the silver wall in its front. The flat and smooth silver casing was like a solid mirror. It protected the girl like a shield. Its foot rubbed on the ground as it stared at the prey in front. The Deathclaw grinned menacingly and moved a few steps to the side. It looked at its prey without any movement before its legs exerted with full force, and with a loud roar, it hurled at her again, with a mocking grin. The girl raised her right hand. The silver wall retransformed into a pool of silver water and centered on where she stood. Then, it converged along the floor in the direction of the Deathclaw. Roar! The roar of the Deathclaw made all the glass inside the isolation room tremble. With the Deathclaw leaping towards her, the girl just smiled, as if she was patting away dust from her sleeves. She waved her hand in the Deathclaw's direction. Countless thick spikes burst out from the ground and blocked all possible escape routes of the Deathclaw. Too late to stop. The Deathclaw was like a fly that threw itself into the net and slammed in unpreparedly. It was stabbed by countless spikes and its charging posture was fixated in midair. The claw stopped 2 inches in front of her. The girl turned and looked at the stunned Lin Lin and Zhang Chen behind the tempered glass. She had a slight grin on her face. From the astonished look of the two, she felt unprecedented joy. Chapter 1282. X71291's new name. The silver spikes that penetrated the Deathclaw melted into silver liquid again and spilled to the ground. The mercury-like liquid slowly moved forward, gathered towards the girl's foot, and rolled back into her body through her pants. Losing its support, the penetrated Deathclaw smashed onto the ground. Its blood gushed out from the countless wounds and left a giant pool of blood in the isolation room. The girl passed through the security door and left the isolation room. She looked at Zhang Chen and then clapped. What did you think? A digitalized human body is actually very convenient. Even if you unlock the genetic code to the 3rd level, it's impossible for you to possess such power. Do you not want to try it? You can become an immortal being. No, even without a digitalized human body, I have a way of becoming immortal. Zhang Chen felt it was physically unacceptable to replace parts of his body with metal. Really? Then it's up to you. The girl shrugged. Speaking of which, that liquid metal was. Zhang Chen looked at her pants and wondered where the previous silver liquid had disappeared to. Inside her clothes? Not likely. With her petite appearance, there was not anywhere she could hide things. When the young girl heard Zhang Chen's question, she concisely replied, "It's called liquid metal. This type of metal is easily affected by magnetic fields and currents. With the computing power of a quantum computer, I can calculate the relationship between the shape and magnetic field environment in real time, and their deformation is controlled by the current." Zhang Chen suddenly remembered the former Pan-Asia Cooperation intelligence personnel he encountered when he was at Line 0. The weapon he used seemed to be a metal that could change its shape freely, but his ability was only to condense the silver liquid metal into a projectile such as a knife or a needle. It didn't seem to possess the ability to become a shield and weapon so freely like X71291's. Only with contrast could he spot the gap. Zhang Chen gained a further understanding of the power of the girl in front of him. Speaking of which, did you think of a name for yourself? Name? X71291, does that not work? The girl revealed a slight frown. That doesn't seem like a normal name. Zhang Chen face-palmed. That's troublesome, the girl sighed, and said impatiently, I'll leave it to you. Leave it to me? Yes, aren't names used by others? The girl said with reasonableness. If that's the case, just give me a name that's easy to say. Anything is fine. Zhang Chen showed a peculiar expression. His ability to name things was something people criticized. It was bad to the point where Kelvin only mentions the naming process to Zhang Chen and no longer asked for his opinion in naming starships. Or just Tingting? But then Tingting is the one in Lin Lin's body. Forget it. Just a random name is fine. He thought for a moment. Then, as he was about to speak up, Lin Lin spoke before him. How about Lilith? Lilith? A flash of data stream flashed through X71291's pupils. and she nodded. Is it based on the manga character? The settings are indeed similar. So Dasini, this name will do. Linlin suddenly blushed when she heard what Lilith said. Then, she asked somewhat embarrassed, have you read that comic? Zhang Chen looked at Linlin and was confused. What are you talking about? What manga? She is probably referring to the Galaxy Era, a comic published in 2159. The heroine in the comic was a digitalized girl who could use liquid metal and her name was Lilith. Lilith shrugged. I have a backup of this information in my database. That's the story behind this. Zhang Chen looked at Linlin who was full of excitement and made a helpless expression. He used to try the mangas Linlin recommended, but he could not get into them. The aesthetic differences between different eras caused him to be unable to appreciate the works of art in this world. At this point, Sun Zhao and Ziru also realized this point. Only Yao Yao, who was also from before the war, could enjoy the same kind of art as Linlin. Then is there a backup in your database of the plot after volume 31? Linlin didn't care about the look on Zhang Chen's face. Linlin immediately excitedly asked, I have been looking for the volumes after 2170. Before the war broke out, she was brought into Fallout Shelter Row 05 by her father to assist him in his research on advanced artificial intelligence. Until now, she was still bothered by the fact that she did not get to see the plot after volume 31. Lilith's words undoubtedly gave her hope. If the manga was backed up in the database, the last volume was published in September 2171, and it was halted indefinitely due to the war. So far it has not resumed serialization. Unfortunately, Lilith soon gave the ruthless facts to Linlin. For volume 32, I can find it in my database, but the stories that follow are probably gone. I see. No wonder I can't find it. Linlin was disappointed. She clearly tried hard to search for the manga. Actually, you don't have to be disappointed. For my quantum computer group, drawing an ending with graphics processing technology will not even take a minute. If you need it, I can draw the rest of that manga now, Lilith said without a change of expression. No. Linlin shook her head, and sighed with regret. A manga not completed by the original author has no meaning at all. Even if you finish the ending for the original author, it can only be considered as fan content. Lilith tilted her head. What's the difference? The difference is immense, Linlin retorted out of reflex. Okay, humans are really a troublesome creature. Lilith sighed and gave up continuing to persist on this issue. As an advanced artificial intelligence, she possessed emotions. But it was impossible to be exactly the same as human beings. After all, the two did not belong to the same species at all, and the differences between the two were not only reflected in the physiological level, but also in all aspects such as values, perception, and so on. And this difference was exactly what X71291 desperately wanted to understand. By the way, I was just about to ask you, those liquid metals, where are you hiding them? Zhang Chen asked curiously. Oh, that? Lilith reached out to unbutton her jeans. Hey wait, why are you taking off your pants? What are you doing? Linlin hurriedly grabbed Lilith's hand and pulled her pants back up. Right, why are you suddenly taking off your pants? Zhang Chen, who stood next to her, facepalmed again. Did she just lack common sense, or did she not treat herself as a person? Well, she is not a human. Lilith tilted her head and looked at Zhang Chen with confusion in her eyes. Didn't you ask me where I hide those liquid metals? She pointed to her butt as if it was completely reasonable. I was just going to show it to you. For some reason, after Lilith's explanation, Zhang Chen suddenly gained some sympathy for the Deathclaw in the isolation room. Poor thing was killed by poop. Chapter 1283. Why didn't you just ask me? Back inside the mansion, Sun Zhao looked suspiciously at the poker-faced Lilith. Her eyes wandered between Linlin and Zhang Chen. Being stared down by Sun Zhao made Zhang Chen somewhat uncomfortable, so he touched his nose to hide the awkwardness. Then he asked with a guilty conscience, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Sun Zhao shook her head. "I just wonder if I have to add another pair of chopsticks at home." "No, I don't need to eat. I just need to replace my battery regularly. As Lilith spoke, she grabbed her clothes and was about to show Sun Jiao the battery slot on her chest. Lin Lin, who was standing next to her, immediately grabbed her hand and stopped her from exposing herself. Ziru also reached out, but she covered Zhang Chen's eyes instead. It's time to eat. What are you all doing? Yao Yao, in an apron, came into the living room. She saw Zhang Chen, whose eyes were covered by Ziru, and at Lilith, with a poker face. She blinked in confusion, not really understanding what had happened. Nothing. I just wanted to show the location of the battery, but she stopped me. Lilith spoke to Yao Yao and said seriously. Although Lilith said she didn't need to eat, the kind-hearted Yao Yao prepared a pair of chopsticks for her. Lilith took a bowl of rice from Yao Yao expressionlessly and went to sit next to Zhang Chen. Zhang Chen didn't know if it were an illusion, but he could feel that even if she didn't show any expressions on her face, she was still very happy that she could sit at the dinner table with everyone. Even though he himself thought that speculating on the thought of a program was a bit stupid anyway. At the dinner table, Lin Lin explained Lilith's identity to everyone. Sun Jiao had heard about Lin Lin's recent work. When she heard that Lilith was number X71291, Sun Jiao's reaction was similar to that of Zhang Chen's, and all her emotions were written on her face. In some ways, the two were really similar. After lunch, Lilith accompanied Yao Yao and Ziru and took the plates to the kitchen. There, they washed the plates clean, and then returned to the living room. In the living room, they entangled themselves with Zhang Chen, who was sitting on the sofa and reading a book. When will you take me to the other world? Lilith looked at Zhang Chen and asked. After a few days. I have some things to deal with here. What happened? Are you in a hurry? Zhang Chen asked. I'm in a hurry. Lilith nodded expressionlessly. Then she blinked and a glimmer of eagerness appeared in her pupils for half a second. In a hurry to get into a raid. Zhang Chen froze slightly before he suddenly understood. One of the reasons Lilith wanted to go the modern world was that it was fed up with watching as an outsider and wanted to participate in Godly Land as a player. But is it cheating to let advanced artificial intelligence play? As if she had guessed what Zhang Chen was thinking, she added expressionlessly, rest assured, I'll only participate in the game as a player, and I will not use any means outside the rules to change the server data. It's boring. I'm not worried about this. Zhang Chen shook his head and said with a smile, it's just a little surprising. At this point in time, as the only large-scale immersive VR online games, it had actually only accounted for a small part of the Future Technology's virtual reality network, especially now that Future Technology was developing a large-scale space-themed online game with the Milky Way as the background. Even if Lilith ruined Godly Land, it would only cost him a few hundreds of millions at most. Surprising? Lilith looked at Zhang Chen expressionlessly. Well, this kind of thing doesn't matter. Since you are not worried about this, can you take me there? You've waited for so many years. Can you not wait another 4 or 5 days? Zhang Chen gave her a side eye. You can send me to that world first and then come back. It should be easy for you. Rest assured, I am very obedient. In order to strengthen her persuasion in this sentence, Lilith restarted the emoticon function, which was originally shut off to save power, and she made an I'm super obedient expression. Zhang Chen was unmoved by this, but his mouth twitched. You know this is impossible. In any case, he would not leave her alone in that world. Lilith let out a hopeless sigh. She knew she had no chance to persuade him. Well, then can you tell me what are you going to do in the next few days? I'm investigating some things related to Pan-Asia Cooperation's space projects, Zhang Chen said nonchalantly as glanced at Lilith. You should have heard that Pan-Asia Cooperation had a research station on Mars. I want to know about that. The more detailed the information, the better. Oh, that, Lilith nodded with the same expressionless state, looked at Zhang Chen, and said, why didn't you just ask me? NASA headquarters, a group of workers wore headphones and worked busily and nervously at the computer desk. Behind this group, in addition to Bolden and the deputy director of NASA, Several FBA agents in gray suits could be seen pointing around. Intelligence experts appeared at NASA, a scene that was rare in the history of a space flight. The reason why this happened was due to an incident that happened a few days ago. Just a few days ago, several astronauts, stranded in the Mars colony, made their routine video call to their families. It was done on a monthly basis and under the supervision of Celestial Trade staff. While the call was in progress, NASA staff members accompanying the astronauts' relatives unexpectedly discovered that the astronaut named Jenny seemed to be using this opportunity to send a call for help subtly. This phenomenon was discovered by Jenny's family and they notified the NASA staff. Consequently, this immediately caught the attention of the authorities. Jenny's colleagues retrieved the record of her video call with her family members, played it over 10 times, and found some unusual spots. After Bolden reported the incident, the authorities sent FBA intelligence experts to assist in the investigation. Sure enough, with the help of professionals, they immediately discovered where the problem was. Pay attention to the frequency of her blinking. Fast blinking means short sound, and slow blinking means long sound. This is Morse code. Compare frame by frame. Pay attention to every action and every keyword. Don't let go of any details. Soon, a code list of dots and dashes were transcribed. Glancing at the password table, the intelligence expert from the FBA immediately picked up a pencil and scribbled down the translation result on another piece of paper. 071, danger. New species. Holding on to the paper, the intelligence expert walked next to Bolden and the FBA director. Several possible errors have been deleted. The keywords that she repeatedly emphasized were these three: danger and new species are well understood. It's likely Celestial Trade had disrupted another part of the ecosystem on Mars, but what does 071 mean? The FBA director frowned slightly, then he said inexplicably. Bolden's brow scrunched slightly. He vaguely felt that number was familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. His eyes moved around the room. When his eyes fell on the face of a black colleague, his eyes suddenly lit up, and he immediately looked at the FBA director. Mine 071, I remember it. Remember the James incident, the black employee who was killed by devil worms? I remember seeing in a report that he was exploring groundwater reserves at Mine 071, because it was news in his field of work, and because he was a black man. The incident left a strong impression on Bolden. After the FBA director heard Bolden's words, he appeared stunned. The devil worm, Mine 071. New species. She means that Celestial Trade was again attacked by Martian species while they were developing Mine 071, and this time it was a new species other than the devil worm. The same incident happened twice in the same place. Why are they so attached to Mine 071? Unless there is something there that is worth their attachment. When Bolden raised his head, he looked at the FBA director, who was also looking at him, and they both saw the unusualness in each other's eyes. Chapter 1284, The Colonial History of Mars. Jenny Karim, a former New York Times battlefield reporter. She won the Pulitzer Prize for a report on Iraq's chemical weapons. In 2018, she signed up for NASA's astronaut training program, originally trained for the moon landing mission. However, because the mission was postponed, she became part of the Ares. Aisha read through the report as she sat in her office inside Future Building. Zhu Yu, director of the Domestic Anti-Intelligence Office, stood in front of her and was reporting to her the findings on the recent investigation. When she was a war correspondent in Iraq, she may have been trained by the SIB. According to the information collected by Bernice in there is evidence that the SIB, the FBA and other intelligence agencies have issued a special document to train field reporters and diplomats in anti-investigation training in response to a possible hostage crisis. She is from the SIB? Aisha looked to Zhu Yu. It's unlikely, Zhu Yu shook her head, and then continued, but we have reason to believe that the IA has received her message. The number 071 alone would not reveal any valuable information. However, what concerned Aisha was that they could use the recent news to generate some bewildering thoughts. While Aisha was silent, Zhu added. At present we have sent an inquiry letter to Celestial Trade and the Space Department. Based on Kelvin's reply, they immediately controlled the individuals involved in the incident. Do we need to implement disciplinary measures for her observer? There were no ghost agents on Mars. The astronauts were under the surveillance of Celestial Trade Army Intelligence Division, not professional intelligence personnel. He could know Morse code, but he could not relate Morse code with the frequency of blinking, and he could never have thought that the person he monitored passed sensitive information by blinking. Maybe the person didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes, but that person would have to be at least a Conan to notice the subtle details. Zhu tried to put herself in the position and thought that even she could not do a better job in this scenario. Like the FBA, she also found problems in the countless replays. However, discipline existed for a reason. Personal accountability must exist, and there was no excuse for this. The personnel involved from Celestial Trade will be handled in accordance with military regulations, and we will not intervene. Aisha's slender finger gently tapped on the document, and she thought for a moment before she said, "In the future, terminate real-time communication services for stranded astronauts and change it to delayed transmission of video. In addition, all videos, whether they enter or leave the colony, must be double-checked by ghost agents and the Celestial Trade Army Intelligence Division. No matter where the problem is found, the person involved will be immediately disqualified from contact with their family. It is better to be safe than sorry." Roger. Zhu stood straight and responded with certainty. Last thing, Aisha paused for a second before she ordered, "Send a truth-telling serum to the Mars colony." I'm curious, where did she hear about number 071? The apocalypse, in the mansion. Lilith, sitting on the sofa, complied with Zhang Chen's request and introduced him to the history of Pan-Asia Cooperation's colonization of Mars. The Mars plan could be traced back to the middle of the 21st century. At that time, the three major forces, Soviet Union, NATO, and Pan-Asia had successfully delivered astronauts to the surface of Mars. However, the Pan-Asia Cooperation Mars Scientific Research Station was built in the early 22nd century. NATO took the lead in announcing the launch of the Mars colonization plan, and successfully sent a 500,000-ton class research ship to the Mars orbit. The Pan-Asia Parliament immediately issued the colonization plan to more than 20 scientific institutions, and the first Mars colony was finally built in 2110. Wait. I remember that the three major forces did not establish a Mars colony. Zhang Chen frowned, interrupting Lilith's words. Because of political reasons, Lilith shrugged. All countries were condemning each other's colonial behavior, emphasizing that outer space resources must be shared by all human beings. Of course, they could not slap their own face. The official name of all colonies were 30 Scientific Research Station. According to the data in my database, by 2120, in less than 10 years, Pan-Asia Cooperation built more than 20 scientific research stations with more than 1,000 personnel on Mars. Zhang Chen was shocked by the number. As the president of Celestial Trade, no one knew the cost of Mars colony better than him. From the budget he received from the Mars colony, even with his financial power, he felt pain every time he received the report. With more than 20 colonies built and no profit achieved, Pan-Asia Cooperation was probably losing more than a space elevator every year. However, even if it was the case, Zhang Chen still understood their intention. To give an example, it was like Uber and Lyft competing for business. Everyone was burning money at the start, and burning money at an incredible rate. But it was for the purpose to gain market share. Perhaps Pan-Asia Cooperation officials also knew that every colony built was going to lose money, but no one could wait until the colonies turned profitable. If they decided to wait until Mars turned profitable, their own enterprises would have already lost at the starting point. Even just for a possibility, sending people there first to claim land was the best starting point. In contrast, Celestial Trade was extremely lucky as the company entered the Mars colonization era 1 century in advance. Without a single competitor, there was enough time and space to rationally develop the entire market. So, The major forces did not just build a research station on Mars, they built dozens of them, and each scientific research station is actually a colony in disguise? Zhang Chen asked. Yes. Lilith nodded. That's been the case since the early 22nd century. Why are there no news from all the colonies? Lin Lin, who was sitting next to Zhang Chen, frowned. She muttered in confusion. In my memory, there were no reports of colonies at all. This is very easy to explain. You were born in the 50s, right? Lilith asked. Yes. Lin Lin nodded. Then you should have heard of the economic crisis of 2150. Even Zhang Chen nodded this time. When he first arrived in the apocalypse, he learned about the economic crisis that was generally considered to be the cause of the World War in 2171. Note, if you forget the plot, you can go back to Chapter 2 in the recorded history in my database. As of 2149, the number of scientific research stations for Pan-Asia cooperation had reached 41, and for the Soviet Union and NATO, the numbers were similar. When the economic crisis happened, countries were unable to sustain those bottomless pits. Therefore, the Houston Convention was signed in 2150. In addition to outlining zones on Mars, it also reduced its respective colonies or scientific research stations to 15. However, this doesn't explain why I haven't heard of those scientific research stations at all, Lin Lin said and held the same frown on her face. Of course it can explain it, Lilith looked at Zhang Chen. Because it involved another problem about the colonies. It was also related to the Gaia civilization you mentioned before, Chapter 1285, War Against Colonies. By 2150, the population of Pan-Asia Cooperation citizens on Mars had exceeded 500,000. Of these 500,000, almost 80% were native Martians. Lilith focused on Zhang Chen as she continued. And in the land-claiming game on Mars, all countries have overlooked a problem, that is, the sense of identity of the Mars citizens to the sovereign state. A lot of young Martians have never been to Earth, they only heard about things on Earth from their grandparents and only learned about Earth through film and television. Is there no internet? Zhang Chen wondered. The discovery of Klein particles happened a long time after, and the application for ultra-long-distance communication was after the war. As Lilith explained the context, she looked to Lin Lin, who had proudly raised her chest. It was Lin Lin's work that allowed communication through the Klein particle resonance effect. After a moment's pause, Lilith continued in her undulating tone. Before that, the means of communication between the colony and the Earth relied mainly on electromagnetic waves, with an average delay of up to 5 minutes and a maximum delay of even close to half an hour. It is equivalent to shouting into the phone here, and waiting for a long time before it can be heard on Mars. If there was any solar wind, the loss of communication was extremely common. So in order to ensure the effective transmission of information, the communication between Earth and Mars required the same message to be delivered 3 times. The information lag directly led to the absence of information. Over time, the cultural differences caused by the lack of information exchange had become greater and greater, and this has laid the groundwork for future conflicts. The 2150 Houston Convention was viewed as a wise decision by citizens of all nations, but was regarded as a shameful betrayal by most Martians. Riots of considerable scale broke out across the colonies, especially those colonies that were about to be put on the abolition list. Although countries introduced plans, it was clear that the highly autonomous colonies did not agree with them. Almost a month after the signing of the Houston Convention, a total of 59 Pan-Asia, NATO, and Soviet colonies jointly signed the 22nd century version of the Declaration of Independence, announced the establishment of the Mars Federation, and organized a coup. With the support of some officers, the insurgents successfully controlled all 3 space elevators on Mars and forced all the uncertain colonies to join the Federation. Don't they long for Earth? Zhang Chen was intrigued. Only people who haven't been to the Mars colonies will have such confusion, Lilith said with the same expressionless face. According to the information in my database, The development of the Mars colonies was not too far behind the cities on Earth, and with the construction of the artificial biosphere, the landscape on Mars was not much worse compared to Earth. As for industrial capacity, I have no specific data to give you, but refer to the development of the Pan-Asia Cooperation steel industry in 2145 published by the Pan-Asia Academy of Social Sciences. Based on the report, the steel output of the Pan-Asia Mars colonies accounted for 27% of the entire Pan-Asia steel output, and was in a serious surplus. After declaring independence, can the Mars colonies be self-sufficient? Zhang Chen asked. Of course not. There was no way to be self-sufficient. On Mars, the helium-3 reserves were extremely low. Once the nuclear fusion battery imported from the Moon was interrupted, all Mars colonies were finished. After a pause, Lilith continued, so, after Mars colonies declared independence, it immediately declared war on Earth and sent a fleet to liberate the Moon. Fleet? Zhang Chen was dumbfounded. Where did the fleet come from? Don't forget the 3 space elevators that the insurgents controlled at the start of the coup, as well as the starships in the spaceport, Lilith explained. Because there was no need for warfare, no one prepared for a Mars independence. Back then, the battleships were modified transport ships. The modification was simple and crude as they installed as many electromagnetic pulse cannons as possible on them. You just asked why you didn't hear any news about Mars. Lilith looked at Lin Lin. Because from that time on, the news from Mars were censored. As for the reason for the censorship, perhaps it was because of the unwillingness to admit the failure of the development strategy in the past decade on Mars, or perhaps it was also due to other political considerations. In any case, the Pan-Asia Cooperation did implement strict censorship on Mars after 2150. It would be understandable since 20 years before you were born, no news on Mars were broadcasted. Lin Lin opened her mouth in astonishment, and Zhang Chen continued to frown, still confused with the situation. But what does this have to do with the Gaia civilization? This involves the highest level secrets of the Pan-Asia Cooperation. Even I don't know, Lilith shrugged. But using the limited intelligence I have for analysis, it is not difficult for us to draw conclusions that is close to the truth. Holding up one finger, Lilith went on to say, first, the Pan-Asia Cooperation, the NATO, and the Soviet Union censor must be based on the premise that the three-nation coalition was victorious against the Mars Federation rebels, in epic fashion. Zhang Chen nodded and agreed with her statement. Not only in epic fashion, the Mars fleet perhaps did not even make it to the Moon before it was completely destroyed. Otherwise, it would be useless to censor the information when war was so close to Earth. Second, Lilith raised her second finger. Since the Earth forces suppressed the rebels in a short period of time, why would the news of the colony be censored for 20 years, and even remain censored after another world war? It can't be that they fought for 20 years? Zhang Chen smiled. Without the Moon's supply of nuclear fusion fuel, it was difficult for Mars Federation to last for even a year. Lilith shook her head. There is only one possibility that the news was to be censored forever, and that is a major accident happened on Mars that could not be made public. For example? Zhang Chen frowned as he seemed to have caught on to something. For example, everyone on Mars died, Lilith said blankly. Lin Lin, who was sitting next to them, gasped, ruling out the possibility that these people died in the hands of the Earth forces. Since the goal of each nation was to suppress the coup, recover the occupied colonies, and not to kill civilians. Lilith continued her logic. We assume the independence war lasted for half a year. During this half year, the Mars Federation insurgents discovered the relics of the Gaia civilization and saw hope in turning the tide of the battle again through the memory of the Gaia civilization. Immediately after they got the key, they began to excavate the ruins. Then finally, along the way, they turned on a nightmare switch, and ultimately killed everyone. Devil worms? Zhang Chen was digesting the information as his eyebrows furrowed. Accurately speaking, it should be species native to Mars. Based on this conjecture, countries began to study Mars species and the Gaia civilization as early as 2152. The latter did not see any progress, and it was likely because the relics were destroyed. As for the former, the progress was quite impressive. From what I know, the X1 bacteria previously used to remove radiation but ended up becoming a deadly virus, had part of the DNA strand from the radiation-resistant bacteria found on Mars. Zhang Chen attempted to puzzle everything together. Suddenly, a thought came to his mind. Did the Brahma bring all those live alien species to Gliese 581 grams? At least, some of the bugs. Chapter 1286, Arrest. On Mars, a woman was escorted by several soldiers and locked into a cell. What do you want? Let go of me. You have no right to restrict my personal freedom. Jenny hit the iron bars with her bare hands and angrily shouted at the celestial soldiers outside the door, "You savages, I'm going to report you and let the media all over the world know that I have been treated unfairly here." The soldiers stopped and turned around. The eyes that focused on her were without much emotion. Jenny felt teary after being stared down and her tone became weaker. "I have the right to know why you're locking me up here. I have clearly complied with the laws and have not violated any rules. Why did you lock me here?" Until now, she still had hope that she did not get caught. She thought what she pulled off was flawless, and even if Celestial Trade gathered sufficient evidence, she still had excuses. Many people would blink more in a nervous situation. She never learned Morse code and did not intend for her nervous actions to be overinterpreted. However, the two soldiers just looked at each other and sneered. "There is no point in dishonesty. There are no lawyers or courts here." One of the soldiers stepped forward and said, "The arrest warrant was issued by ghost agents. When we investigated your correspondence, we found you leaked sensitive information using Morse code. I demand extradition, and there is an extradition treaty between ZIN and the Jenny said nervously when she realized that her trick was easily exposed. "Oh, really? I haven't heard that you can be extradited on charges of espionage. And this is Mars, not ZIN." With a sneer, and the soldier said sarcastically, "Also, I can tell you that because of your thoughtless behavior, the return date for you and your friends will be postponed until we are sure that you have not overheard more sensitive information. You will stay here with us and enjoy this beautiful sandy planet. You can't do this." Only now did Jenny finally realize how much trouble her behavior had caused her crewmates. However, the two soldiers did not want to listen to any more of her nonsense, and while she still wanted to say something more, the door of the room was closed shut. In the narrow corridor, darkness returned. In front of the cell, an officer of the Army Intelligence Division ticked the logbook and nodded to the two soldiers, signaling that they could go. Brace was at the other end of the corridor. He hesitated for a moment, but finally decided to step forward. When the astronaut approached him, the officer had a mocking smile. "Do you want to plea for your crewmate? Is there no other solution?" Brace glanced at where his colleague was being held, and then looked at the soldier. "Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Jenny is a good person." "Misunderstanding? Good person?" The officer pushed up his hat and stared at Brace with a half smile. "A good person would not be a spy." "Spy?" Brace frowned. He suddenly had a bad feeling. In fact, when celestial soldiers came this morning to take her away, the feeling was already lingering in his mind. He kept telling Jenny not to probe into something she shouldn't know, but apparently, she didn't take his words to heart. When he heard the word spy, he immediately understood what was happening to that girl. It must be that she was sniffing around, and was caught by Celestial Trade. He thought of the conversation he had with his family on Earth and Brace's face suddenly turned pale. Then he cursed at Jenny with all the words he could think of. "But do you know that your actions may hurt the relationship between the two countries?" While Brace scolded Jenny, after all, Jenny reported under him, he tried to plea, before there are conclusive pieces of evidence. When our soldiers risked their lives to save you from the broken ship, they have taken the greatest care for the relationship between the two countries." The officer interrupted the former captain and said with a hint of a sneer, "But how do you repay our grace? It wasn't just the astronaut who was detained. The Intelligence Department investigator who supervised her communications and the investigator who worked under him were all detained. With his soldier detained, of course, the Army intelligence officer did not treat him with the best attitude. "Sorry," Brace said awkwardly. "I apologize for my colleague's reckless behavior." "We won't be angry at you," the officer said coldly, "but don't expect us to treat you with respect either." "As you wish. I now offer you an alternative that takes care of the relationship of both countries. Either do everything as we say or pack up and go back to Ares." Brace froze. "Go back to Ares? That's like asking for death." "If you want to go back, you can come to my office at any time, and I will drive you back in person." The officer stared at Brace and uttered out this sentence word by word. While Brace was still processing the information, the officer walked away without looking back. Outside the colony, the war against the swarms continued. The soldiers, shielding behind the cover on the wall, fired back with the Gauss rifle while dodging the spewing acids. It seemed that the assault on a colony was becoming a norm, and these bugs just didn't seem to die at all. And the most terrifying part was that the intelligence of those bugs was substantially higher than the devil worms. In just a week, their tactics evolved from simply trying to flood the colony to repeated attacks to consume Celestial Trade's ammunition. The production cost of a missile was close to $6 million in new dollars. After accounting for transportation and launch cost, the total was close to the $10 million figure. Although the cost should not be a factor considered by the military, the command center already proposed to the captain of the expedition more than once to use electromagnetic pulse cannons instead of missiles, if possible. Inside the office of the Space Department, Kelvin looked at the budget report with a headache. At this moment, there was a knock at the door. "Come in." Setting aside the budget report in his hand, Kelvin looked at the door and said nonchalantly. After the staff received permission, he walked into the office. "Reporting." "What's the matter?" "SS Origin successfully completed deceleration into the Mars synchronous orbit, requesting next commands." Kelvin, after hearing the news, looked at his watch. "It's been a week." Kelvin looked at the staff and ordered with an affirmative voice, "Start weapon deployment immediately." "Roger." "It's time to end it all." Kelvin watched the staff member leave as he thought. He did not have the slightest doubt that the weapons, specifically tailored to the bugs, would shred those bugs into pieces. Chapter 1287, Holy Shield. In the apocalypse, a secluded factory on the northern outskirts of Wanghai was on heightened security under the control of NAC soldiers. The factory was only about 20 kilometers from the 6th Street. Compared with its desolate appearance, the factory itself was full of life. Under the supervision of NAC soldiers, NAC engineers operated the mechanical cantilever and carefully placed the energy tank containing several kilograms of deuterium and helium-3 into the slot of a giant machine covering an area of over 100 square meters. A technician from the Guardian sect stood with the NAC scientists at the moment. He was looking at everything in front of him with excitement. Over a year had passed. Today, their work finally made a breakthrough. As the energy tank was placed into the slot, the entire factory's activities were upped by another gear. Energy output power is normal. Open the switch, start charging. Shield generator initiating. The power system output environment is stable, the temperature is normal, and the system is running steadily. The shield generator is activated. We are successful. The sound of the stable operation of the machine was like heaven's melody. With a shout of excitement, loud cheers erupted in the factory. Engineers and researchers high-fived each other, and even the soldiers stationed on the side had a look of relief. Everyone was full of excitement and joy, and embraced each other to celebrate this long-awaited moment. Once this shield-generating device was repaired, other devices could also be repaired. Soon, the news reached the heart of NAC, the mansion at Fishbone Base. Zhang Chen immediately ordered someone to prepare a vehicle as he planned to make a personal visit to the site. For NAC, repairing the Holy Shield was equivalent to protecting all of Wanghai from the nuclear winter. For Celestial Trade, The complete mastery of Holy Shield technology was equivalent to directly increasing the defense of the Earth Fleet and Celestial Trade Fleet to a new level. They made a leap from hard armor defense to energy shield. Not long after, escorted by armored vehicles and tanks, an extended car was parked at the gate to the factory. The door opened, and Jiang Chen, accompanied by a group of soldiers, walked to the main gate in quick steps. The project leader was already waiting there along with the scientists. From the back, Lilith also jumped out and followed behind him. As he walked towards the factory, the person in charge of the repair of the Holy Shield system explained to Jiang Chen in excitement. Repair work is mainly focused on shield generators. During the war, NATO's Special Forces attacks on the Holy Shield systems were mainly directed against shield generators. The technical difficulties we have faced were also around the generator. But now, since all the issues have been resolved, the remaining shield generating devices shouldn't be more troublesome than this one. Before this winter, we should be able to complete all the repairs. With an approving nod, Jiang Chen followed him into the factory and stopped in front of the giant shield generator. This thing has been repaired? Jiang Chen looked at the shield generating device in stable operation and then looked back at the scientist behind him. Why do I not see the shield? Before he headed to Shangjing, Lin Lin gave him a miniature version of the Holy Shield system. From his memory, it was possible to see a pale yellow outline. The graviton could force all approaching mass to either stop or change direction, including air and dust particles. The shield is mainly concentrated on top, and does not necessarily have to form a closed sphere. To describe it in more details, it's like an umbrella. In addition, a shield generating device on a city scale forms a shield 2 kilometers above the city. Of course, we can lower it, the scientist explained. Jiang Chen nodded. No, I trust you. It was simple to test the strength of the shield. He would just need to command as order to fire at this location. But after he thought about it a bit more, he decided against it. The Holy Shield system could defend against space-based weapons after all. This can be tested later, after he leaves here. When Jiang Chen inspected the work with the accompanying scientist, Lilith went to the shield generator and tapped the generator. A stream of data appeared through her pupils, and soon she retracted her finger and returned to Jiang Chen. Jiang Chen noticed her action and looked to her in curiosity. What did you just do? Optimized the program and eliminated some backdoors. In approximate terms, just increased the performance of the hardware by 5%, and increased the difficulty of infiltration to the maximum. Count that as an update to the program, Lilith said with a blank expression. You can do that? Jiang Chen was genuinely surprised. The ability to update the system designed before the war was quite remarkable in a sense. Although it was just a software update, it was designed by the countless scientists of Pan-Asia Cooperation. Is this difficult for the world's only advanced artificial intelligence? Lilith asked earnestly. Although she was showing off, it was true. Jiang Chen did not know the number of advanced artificial intelligences at NATO and the Soviet Union. But there must be only one advanced artificial intelligence at PAC. By the way, I've always been curious about how powerful your processing is, Jiang Chen said. As long as I can identify the hardware, I can use it freely, Lilith shrugged. For me, using electronics is probably as easy as eating and drinking to you. After all, she was a program. Jiang Chen nodded, entrenched in his thoughts. He suddenly said, what if I asked you to hack a country's nuclear weapon system? It depends on how well their security is, Lilith said in the same expressionless state, but she smiled. If they fired nuclear weapons with Facebook or Twitter, I probably only need 1 second to explode the weapons. True, he hesitated for a moment, then understood the humor in Lilith's words, and laughed. But speaking of which, you know Facebook and Twitter? Indeed, after all, nuclear weapons were not launched on Twitter and Facebook. Jiang Chen was not aware of the launch procedure of the but for celestial trade, from the moment he pressed the button to the launch of the missile deployed at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, there were at least 3 procedures, and physical isolation existed between each procedure. For example, in the last procedure, after confirming the order, 2 staff members at the launch pad must insert metal keys into the lock, and they must rotate the key to start the launching process at the same time, and then the third person must enter the launch code through the mechanical keyboard. No one would be foolish enough to believe the rumor of a hacker using cyber attack to paralyze a country's nuclear weapons. I can get a lot of information from that game, and I can even pinpoint exactly which player has spoken to whom and at what time. Lilith explained. She made it sound like it was something that could be easily done by everyone. Just a backdoor on the server allowed her to evolve up to this point. What if she touched Future Technologies' server? Perhaps even the fabled Skynet project would not be able to achieve this. Chapter 1288 Counterattack. Mars Synchronous Orbit. With 2 blue streams closing in, a starship slowly moved closer to the fiery red planet. Inside the bridge, the staff sitting in front of the computer calmly reported, "The orbital parameters have been corrected. We are entering the synchronous orbit. All parameters are normal. Initiate mission launch sequence." The drop compartment has successfully separated. Separation successful, and the drop compartment is leaving the synchronous orbit. The course has been revised. You can leave at any time. Looking at the fiery red planet outside the starship, the captain behind the bridge took a deep breath, picked up the wired intercom, and ordered affirmatively, "All units, the main engine is igniting. We're re-entering our course." Roger that. After dropping the compartment suspended on the ship, SS Origin orbited for a quarter around Mars orbit and only encountered TS Expedition stationed in synchronous orbit for a moment before it adjusted its course. Origin's next destination was the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Saturn. With a dazzling white light stream pushing behind the starship, the dark ship pierced into the deep universe like a sharp sword and disappeared into the endless blackness. 10,000 meters below, fierce battles continued outside the colony. The swarm continued to attack Celestial Trade Marines on the wall, chipping away the colony's defense with their acid and corpses. The electromagnetic pulse cannon projectiles ravaged the battlefield, sent the yellow sand high up in the air before covering all the blood that spewed. Everything happened so quickly as if nothing had happened, then repeated again and again. As the two sides fought fiercely, a dark shadow surrounded by a ball flame dropped down from 10,000 meters. Like a meteor, it crashed into the chaotic battlefield. Boom! The steel hull came in close contact with the ground. The rough, hard landing flattened a sand dune, and a thick yellow haze set off around the impact site. The bottom of the compartment was deeply embedded in the ground, crushing dozens of corruptors who were besieging the colony into pieces. When the bugs stared blankly at the unexpected visitor, the front door of the cabin collapsed, revealing a giant drill bit hidden behind the cabin door. The bugs that lingered around the compartment seemed to have stopped moving as they stared at the metal monster in the middle with confusion. Just as one of the corruptors tried to spit acid, the metal monster inside started to move. The engine roared in the thin atmosphere. With the giant drill, a steel beast emerged from the compartment. The first difference between this rig and those in colony was its sheer size. This rig was more than double the size of the colony's tiny rigs. A thick layer of organic anti-corrosive material was coated to the thick titanium alloy armor. This material was extracted from the blood of devil worms and could render acid strong enough to erode rocks useless. The top and sides of the rig were also modified with small-caliber electromagnetic rapid-fire guns, which could accelerate 10-gram pellets to 3 times the speed of sound. The pellets could easily penetrate the armor of the corruptors. In addition, there were 2 augers that resembled large screws on both sides of the heavy rubber tires, to ensure that the rig was unimpeded in any terrain. Without any exaggeration, it would be fair to say that the steel beast could easily enter and leave the swarm without any damage. Drill Warrior, the name of the steel beast, was painted on both sides of the rig. The name perfectly explained its functionality. No matter above or below ground, no terrain could stop the steel beast from marching forward. Damn, this thing is giant. A Solider taking cover beside Zhang Hai watched the rig and exclaimed, "What did I just see? A heavily armed rig? Haha, Drill Warrior. That is a pretty bad SS name." The compartment not only carried the steel beast, but also 100 T-4H aerospace power armors with corrosion-resistant coating. Unlike the T-4 power armor, the T-4H's minigun was replaced by a relatively slower, but more powerful electromagnetic rapid-fire gun. In the middle were 2 pairs of Vortex engines and 2 bottles of oxygen tanks were added to increase the oxygen holding for 24-hour consumption. Soon, the gates on the west of the colony slowly opened, and a group of armored vehicles, in an attack formation, rushed toward the compartment abandoned in the swarm. Strikes from TS Expedition began to hit on the ground, disrupting the corruptors that was surrounding the fleet. As the fleet rushed to the compartment, the door suddenly opened, and soldiers inside armored vehicles jumped off, and gathered together to form a defensive formation. They maintained open fire as they moved closer to the open compartment. Drill Warrior was already showing off its destructive power in its very first battle. The augers suspended on both sides of its tires dropped down, then the entire rig was lifted. The giant drill in front of the vehicle aimed down before it turned rapidly. Sand filled the air. The entire rig resembled a devil worm made of steel. In less than half a minute, the entire body already disappeared into the ground and headed towards the source of the corruptors. The entire desert became restless, like limestones being tossed into a lake. The corruptors, hiding underground, was taken aback by the sudden emergence of the steel beast. Without the ability to dig, they could only spit the acid at the giant rig in vain, using their claws as powerful as steel in an attempt to stop the steel monster's destruction forward. But their fate was just shredded to pieces by the more powerful titanium drill. Their offense on the surface suddenly slowed down. Under the cover of the Drill Warrior, the soldiers who stormed into the compartment were equipped with the new power armor. Having already simulated and operated the new power armor in the virtual reality training system countless times, they quickly adapted to this powerful new armor. One by one, they marched out of the compartment with the electromagnetic rapid-fire guns. Here is the headquarters. Company A, your task is to follow Drill Warrior to Mine 071, and to recover the land and glory we once lost from those dirty bugs. Roger. Listening to the sound of electric current charging along his right arm, Zhang Hai's entire body was stimulated with energy. Streamlined casing, thick titanium alloy armor, blue light pulsing in the gun, and the blood and corpses of the corruptors splashing on his body. The futuristic armor hit his G-spot. With such a powerful equipment under his control, he had no doubt about the victory. The soldiers no longer needed to scramble to take cover against the splashing acid. Covered by the same material as the blood vessels of devil worms, the armor was coated in an organic layer. Even if they were covered with acid, the anti-corrosive nature would protect them in the battle. Armed to the teeth, the soldiers assembled behind the dunes on the west side of the colony, re-embarked on the armored vehicles, followed the track of the Drill Warrior wrecking havoc underground, and headed in the direction of Mine 071. Chapter 1289, Am I That Kind of a Pervert? With the completion of the Holy Shield system, Zhang Chen asked Sun Jiao to make a copy of all the technical data, and then sent the information to Celestial Trade Server. After a short week of relaxation in the apocalypse, he took Lilith back to the modern world. Perhaps it was his illusion. When he left, he felt the girls' envy when they looked at Lilith. In particular, Lin Lin, as a digitalized human, was whispering something like "so close." But indeed, it was so close. Based on what Lin Lin said earlier, at most in 1 year or two, the interdimensional transmission technology that her research institute was conquering should make a breakthrough. By the time, he would have more headaches. For example, how to introduce Sun Jiao to Ziyashu. Hopefully, with Sun Jiao's careless personality, there would be no conflicts. Hopefully. Modern world. Zhang Chen took Lilith back to Coral Island from Coconut Island by boat. He stopped in front of his door and hesitated for a moment when they were at the front door. "What's the matter?" Lilith looked at Zhang Chen with the same expressionless state. "Try not to speak. I can do the speaking. Besides, don't mention things about that world." Although Aisha and Ziyashu both knew, Natasha also lived here. Despite going through many things together, Zhang Chen still questioned if he can trust her without reservation. In order to avoid unnecessary suspicion and confusion, it was better not to talk about that world. "This is the 7th time you said this," Lilith sighed. "My head is much better than yours. Instead of worrying about me, you should worry about yourself." Zhang Chen glared at Lilith and didn't add anything. He clicked on his watch and opened the gate to the mansion. Behind the main gate was a concrete path across the garden lawn. The road led to the garage and a small path led to the main entrance. As Lilith walked through the lawn, she reached out and poked expressionlessly at the ball-type drone floating over to identify her. The subtle grin perhaps seemed to be mocking the poor design of the drone, or perhaps it was to show the pride of an advanced artificial intelligence in front of a basic artificial intelligence. As soon as the two arrived at the door opened. Aisha rushed into Zhang Chen's arms. After she affectionately rubbed herself against his chest, her head appeared and curiously looked at the girl behind him. Xiaoshu and Natasha closely followed and also appeared at the door, casting the same strange look at Lilith. In fact, they noticed when Zhang Chen arrived at the door. Zhang Chen kissed Aisha's cheek, gently patted her on the back and then placed her down. He then gave Xiaoshu and Zhang Chen a kiss. Just as he was about to introduce Lilith, Xiaoshu pulled him aside and quietly asked, "She is Sun Zhao?" A long time ago, Xiaoshu heard Zhang Chen mention that woman. For the first woman in Zhang Chen's life, her feelings towards Sun Zhao was quite complicated. On the one hand, she was curious what she looked like. On the other hand, those jealous feelings were inevitable. Although she already accepted the status quo of the four living together, it certainly did not mean she won't get jealous. She's not. Who is she then? Xiaoshu also thought she did not seem to be Sun Zhao. She looked suspiciously at him and said, "She looks like she is not even 14 years old. Your little mistress?" Natasha sneered and poured oil into this already tense situation. Zhang Chen gave her a vicious stare in response. "Am I that kind of a pervert?" After being stared down by Zhang Chen, Natasha just mischievously spat out her tongue and walked towards Lilith and Aisha. After Xiaoshu heard what Natasha had said, her suspiciousness only grew. X71291. You can also call her Lilith. It's troublesome to explain, but it's definitely not what you're thinking. Zhang Chen responded to Xiaoshu's suspicious look and quickly explained, "Didn't I tell you about artificial intelligence last time? She is an advanced artificial intelligence, and probably the only one in the world." "She?" Xiaoshu's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked at Lilith in disbelief. Her expression had zero faith written all over it as she could not accept the fact that the girl in front of her was a robot. "Wait, you mean, she is a robot?" The latter was being sandwiched by Aisha and Natasha, responding to the curious questions of the girls. Lilith seemed to sense Xiaoshu's sight as she turned around and smiled at her with friendliness. "As you can see," Zhang Chen nodded with a helpless expression. "Also, it came from there." "She is here to help me." Xiaoshu finally nodded. Although she had never been to the world Zhang Chen described, she knew that the world was an apocalyptic world with advanced technology. If she came from there, it wouldn't be surprising to see an advanced artificial intelligence. It took about 10 minutes for Zhang Chen to formally introduce Lilith. The girls seemed to feel indifferent about a new girl joining the mansion. Aisha would not get jealous. Natasha and Xiaoshu didn't think Zhang Chen would be a pervert. At most, they would have to watch out where their battles took place. Even if Lilith explicitly told Zhang Chen that she had no interest in watching humans mate, they could choose to ignore her presence completely, like how they would ignore a table or a sofa. However, after all, with a human face, Zhang Chen could not bring himself to do such things in front of a 14-year-old Lilith. After a short vacation, Zhang Chen returned to work. With Lilith's help, his efficiency increased significantly. Many times, he just explained his thoughts to her in simple terms, and she perfectly executed his order to the correct departments, even to the right individual. She also showed the progress of projects and create real-time charts for him. These works were done by Xiaoshu and Jean. Since Lilith took over the work of the secretary of the chairman, Jean, the intermediate artificial intelligence, was given to Zai Ashu. As the CEO of Future Group, it was her time to receive an assistant. Of course, these were not the main points. In addition to improving Zhang Chen's own efficiency, Lilith's biggest contribution was her expertise. As an advanced artificial intelligence, her existence was comparable to a division of programmers. After her upgrade, the performance of Future Group's supercomputing center servers increased by a notch. The supercomputing center mainly provided information processing services for the global business of Future Group and Celestial Trade. The center was extremely significant to both enterprises. In addition, the fleet command system originally maintained by Future Technology was also transferred to her. She only squeezed out a small part of her time from playing games, and her efficiency was enough to shame the entire team that was responsible for the project. And only until this moment, did Zhang Chen finally realize he had struck gold. Chapter 1290, Space-Themed Merg. On the third day back in the modern world, the colony sent back good news which eased Zhang Chen's tense state. The report sent by the colony governor, Captain Heng Zhuai, stated that the Celestial Marines successfully recovered the operation base near Mine 071 with the help of new weapons. The drill warrior designed by Future Military and Future Heavy Industry played an incredible role in combating the Mars species. Those T4H power armors also substantially increased the survival rate of the Marines. With drill warrior clearing the way, and heavily armored infantries following closely behind, Company A, responsible for attacking Mine 071, destroyed 6 nests within 24 hours. 5 of these nests were corruptor nests, and the one located outside the radius of the ultrasonic fence belonged to devil worms. A total of tens of thousands of adult corruptors and thousands of devil worms were killed. The Celestial Marines successfully pushed from the surface to 21 kilometers underground. According to the report from Heng Zhuai, they were very close to the bottom of the ruins. When the engineering team complete the reinforcement of the tunnel, it was time for the relics of the Gaia civilization to shine once again. In the mansion at the northern tip of Koro Island, Zhang Chen, who was passing by the living room, asked Lilith, who was resting against a reclining chair with a phantom helmet on, as an advanced artificial intelligence, "Do you also enjoy playing games?" Because she was not human. Even if she wore a phantom helmet, Lilith could still sense outside information. In her words, she could run the game with one memory zone and control her body with the other memory zone. She was capable of being both in the virtual world and the actual world. Zhang Chen must admit that he was envious. "You don't understand," Lilith answered in her emotionless state. "It's not the game that is fun, but the players who participate in the game." Zhang Chen's eyebrows twitched. That's the fun part? He was curious why players were interesting for Lilith. However, it may not sound too great. In her eyes, the players were probably no different than white rats in the laboratory. After all, in her perspective, a troublesome creature like humans could only offer values by contributing to experimental data. Very contradictory thoughts. On the one hand, she possessed the desire to have a body that can integrate into human society, and on the other hand, she maintained the stubbornness of an advanced artificial intelligence. Perhaps this contradiction was part of the attributes of an advanced artificial intelligence. "Don't just play. Since you have so much free time, come and help me do something," Zhang Chen said. "Correct what you just said," Lilith said blankly. "I have helped you process 117.8 GB of files in the past 72 hours, which is equivalent to your normal workload for a month. From any perspective of analysis, my attitude is enough to be considered diligent. In contrast, you seem to be freer because you just move your tongue." That much?" Zhang Chen awkwardly touched his nose after being scoffed by Lilith. "I haven't counted the workload of helping you upgrade the server," Lilith said with clear evidence to back up her words. "To prevent you from forgetting, I have to remind you, this is your war, not my war." "You are right." Lilith sat up and looked at Zhang Chen. "So, tell me, what do you need me to do?" "Oh?" Zhang Chen looked at her, somewhat confused. "I didn't say I won't help you," Lilith shrugged, and said solemnly, I just corrected your allegations. Well, when the program learns to think, it is indeed troublesome. He sorted out the words in his head, coughed, and then said, Future Technology is currently planning a large-scale space-themed VR merg. The main selling points are probably space colonization, starships, trade, mining, technology tree. At present, the development is close to half complete. The latest update is that the game completed the import of the astronomical data from the Celestial Trade Space Department. So, are you interested in developing games? Designing a large-scale VR merg with a space theme was discussed and implemented as early as last year. In addition to the consideration of the current trend, the VR merg also served a political purpose. For example, to promote the current space colonization of celestial trade, to ignite pupils' enthusiasm for the space industry, and to improve the tactical theory of starship battles in a virtual environment. These political goals would not be explicitly stated, but it would be integrated into the game in subtle ways. Of course, for artificial intelligence, designing a game that people love from the beginning may be a little difficult. However, with the game plan already completed, she could easily finish the programming elements. Interest, number. But based on your description, this should be easy for me. Lilith, still with the helmet on, said emotionlessly. Then please and thank you, Zhang Chen said immediately. How long will this take? From his standpoint, he naturally hoped as early as possible. Depends on the workload, Lilith said. A week at most, but 1 or 2 days if I'm quick. If you can make your people give me as much detail about the game as possible, it can alleviate a lot of my workload. You can rest assured, we have the best game design team in the world. Zhang Chen responded with a bright smile. By the end of the day after tomorrow at the latest, my team will put together all the information and hand it over to Xiaoshu. Lilith nodded. After he explained this, he had no reason to stay. After Zhang Chen glanced at the time on his watch, he thought that there were still a few things to deal with, so he stepped towards the entrance. Lilith saw Zhang Chen was about to leave, so she suddenly spoke out. Are you planning to leave? There are 2 meetings I have to attend to in the afternoon, Zhang Chen said, checking the time on his watch. I have to go to the office in a bit. Do you want to stay here? I will go with you. Lilith jumped off from the chair, put on her slippers, and patted her slightly wrinkled dress. Since Lilith had no intention of taking off her helmet, Zhang Chen said as he face-palmed. Is it really okay for you to leave while wearing a helmet? Lilith responded with another question. Is there an issue? Although it was full of issues from Zhang Chen's perspective, he decided against the idea. It was time to go. Chapter 1291, on the shoulder of the Jian. With a blonde Lolai following behind him, Zhang Chen walked into the lobby of Future Building and he seemed to realize that he was becoming the focal point. Although the eyes of his employees were usually focused on him with his arrival regardless, but today, he felt that in everyone's eyes, in addition to the usual respect, there were some strange emotions. Or rather, the desire for gossip. After all, Zhang Chen's romantic affairs were not news in Xin or even the rest of the world, and the employees of Future Group were accustomed to the fact. It was just the fact the girl following behind him seemed too young to be a mistress. Could it be an illegitimate daughter? The passion for gossip ignited in the eyes of the 2 beauties at the front desk. They simultaneously exchanged eye contact and began to whisper. In less than half a minute, the blonde Lilai's story was created. She was a mistake from Zhang Chen's younger days and there was a plot twist even more interesting than a Korean drama. As for the flaw in their logic, they chose to selectively ignore the facts. For example, Zhang Chen was only in his 20s now. Fortunately, it was not the peak time in the lobby, and there were not a lot of people here. With the urge to facepalm, Zhang Chen brought Lilith into the elevator and he finally felt relieved from escaping those odd looks. He looked over to Lilith and her expression remained unchanged, as if those looks did not bother her at all. After they got into the elevator, her eyes stayed on the scene outside the floor-to-ceiling window of the elevator. She gazed at the outline of Koro City in the distance. The elevator rose, and the view outside the window became more and more open. She suddenly said, "What a beautiful city." Slightly shocked by what she said, Zhang Chen looked at her. Lilith noticed his sight, then sighed, as if she had already guessed his thought. "You don't have to think of me as a monster. I still have things like aesthetics." "I didn't mean that." Zhang Chen smiled. "I just feel a little surprised." Lilith did not respond. She just looked at the outline of Koro quietly. After a while, she didn't speak until the elevator stopped on the top floor. "I understand your surprise." The first meeting was the reporting of all departments of Celestial Trade, as well as budget. As in the past, everyone received only 10 minutes to speak, and everyone removed the unnecessary formality in their speech based on Zhang Chen's request. They tried to be as concise as possible in the report. Different from Future Group, in addition to the 3 major projects, space elevator, quantum communication satellites, and global power grids that could report a stellar financial performance, all other projects were either losing money or barely breaking even. But money wasn't important. After all, Zhang Chen's positioning of Celestial Trade was not to generate profit, and he never used KPIs as a criterion for evaluating the work of departments. For most of the non-profit sectors of Celestial Trade, compared with the good-looking financial reports, he valued other achievements. The second meeting was a seminar on the development planning of the Mars colony. The attendees of the meeting were mainly executives of the Celestial Trade Space Department, especially those leading the Mars project. The reason why the meetings were arranged together was to make traveling easier for executives like Calvin, who was stationed in Celestial City. At the meeting, the expansion plan and space elevator were discussed as key topics. However, after the meeting, Zhang Chen added a provisional item in front of these 2 topics to be discussed. That was, establish an Earth civilization monument and school in the colony. "I'm not doubting whether this is necessary, but I think it's too early." After Calvin listened to the president's speech, he was confused by Zhang Chen as to why he brought up this seemingly trivial matter to discuss. "It's not too early." When he looked around at the Mars project executives present, Zhang Chen said in a serious tone, "To strengthen the cultural bond between the colony and mainstream society, we must lay the foundation from the beginning, otherwise, there may be hidden dangers buried." The executives of the Mars project all looked at each other in shock and confusion. No doubt, from their perspective, the president's words were undoubtedly alarmist. Zhang Chen was not surprised by their reaction. After all, they didn't possess his ability to travel to another world, and they naturally would feel confused about the problems he brought up. The reason why Celestial Trade's development was compared to standing on the shoulders of a giant was not simply because the company possessed technology from the 22nd century. In addition to science, the mistakes made by that world's superpowers in their explorations were also great assets for Zhang Chen. He didn't intend to explain anything. As the president of Celestial Trade, he had the highest decision-making power. Whenever he would issue an order, there was no need to vote at all. Others could only make suggestions. The proposal was passed directly, and the next step was to discuss how to implement it. According to Zhang Chen's proposal, the Mars Project Department would budget $2 billion in new dollars to build an Earth civilization monument, elementary and high schools in the Mars colony. At the same time, in the next batch of colonists, 40 teachers and 200 students of different age groups would also be brought on board. "Does it make sense to send teachers and students to the colony?" one of the executives asked, "And how can we convince parents to send their children to Mars? In order to prevent age gaps in the colony, we need a relatively smooth and stable population age distribution curve to stabilize the social structure of our colony. They don't need to do anything there, they just need to stay there to finish their studies, then decide whether to stay in the colony or return to Earth." After highlighting this problem, Zhang Chen continued, "As for the latter problem, this is also very easy to solve. Going to high school in the colony can provide students with additional points during the college entrance examination. I believe there will be many families willing to send their children there. As long as Celestial Trade reimbursed the cost of the tickets, perhaps even the entire family would move to Mars." In the next year, We will open flights to and from Mars and increase the population limit of the colony to 5,000. Compared with the current population size, this number indeed is several times larger. For the future development of the colony, I hope you will pay attention to the issues I have just emphasized. Zhang Chen was pleased as he saw all the executives' expressions begin to turn serious. Then he nodded. After a pause, he continued, "The next topic is the space elevator. To turn Mars into our heavy industry base, a convenient means of transportation is essential. I believe that you have more intuitive data than I do, so I won't emphasize this again. I just need one thing. With the flight to Mars taking off by next year, before November, I hope you can put the Mars Space Elevator program into action. You must guarantee quality while also ensure efficiency." Chapter 1292, Galaxy Edge Trailers. Time passed day by day, and it was already mid-May. Anticipated by the netizens around the world, the long-delayed epic sci-fi masterpiece, Galaxy Edge, suddenly revealed 2 trailers and a 30-minute live demo on the official website, which created widespread and heated discussions. In the first trailer, a huge fleet passed through the vast galaxy, marching toward the dark red nebula with unstoppable momentum, ready to destroy anything in its path. In the depths of the nebula, a group of weirdly shaped starships gradually appeared. No text or phrases. The collision between iron and blood between the two forces unfolded. Radon beams and kinetic weapons raged in the dim space. High-speed carrier-based starcrafts fought among the starships. The dance between light beams and electricity arcs, rendered with extreme details, ignited the passion hidden in the viewers. Everyone wished to be the captain of the starship at that moment, commanding the fearless class into the battlefield of destruction. The first trailer came to an end when the battlefield was illuminated by white clouds and the screen pulled further and further away. The BGM gradually slowed down after a sharp turn, symbolizing destruction, but also new life and hope. The second trailer was a land covered in magenta soil, filled with giant mushrooms. In this tropical rainforest composed of fungal plants, a group of soldiers, equipped with kinetic skeletons, followed by drones, marched forward. With large-caliber Gauss rifles in their hands, they carefully traversed through the rainforest. Behind them was a recently established colony, and in front of them were places that no one had set foot on. There may be endless opportunities buried there, or only death and barrenness. Suddenly, a group of bird-like Mars creatures was startled in the forest as they dispersed into the sky. A roar came from a distance, and all the soldiers took a couple of steps back with uneasiness. Their rifles were raised, alerted for any danger in the deep mist of the forest. Then a growl approached. Suddenly, a group of 4-footed creatures charged out from the forest and clashed against the soldiers in the front. The soldiers in the back row immediately fired back against the alien species. As the size and number of the alien creatures gradually grew larger, vertical takeoff and landing fighters, all-terrain attack vehicles, and even space-based weapons deployed in orbit appeared one after another. The netizens were more and more pumped by the increasingly powerful weapons showcased. In the halo of the nuclear explosion, the film came to an end with the battlefield getting smaller and smaller. Until the end of the song, many people were still shocked by the magnificence of the battle, and the first thing they did after watching the video was not clicking the reply button, but instead, they rushed to the comment area and used their keyboard or holographic touchscreen to share their excitement and shock. Tell me, is this not a recruitment advertisement for Celestial Trade? This is insane. After creating a world, is future technology creating a universe? Fouquet, we have to wait until the end of the month to play. I'm desperate to play this. Have you seen that 30-minute live demo? The combat system is unreal. I bought a limited edition game cabin for this game. The helmet experience can't satisfy me anymore. Oh my, isn't the limited edition game cabin worth 100,000 XND? That's a luxury car. An internet company sold hundreds of thousands of luxury cars overnight, and the company is. The game used the physics system developed by Lilith, and an independent experimental quantum computer for information processing to recreate the physics in real time. While guaranteeing the entertainment and pace of the game, The design pushed the concept of realism to the extreme. In addition, unlike traditional online games, Galaxy Edge's upgrade system was mainly focused on unlocking technology trees, drawings, and modification of starships. Once a battleship was destroyed, it was permanently lost. It was for this reason that the death penalty in Galaxy Edge was extremely punishing. Of course, this did not mean that once the ship is destroyed, there was no compensation. The default setting was that all ships automatically purchased insurance. If a ship was lost because of a black hole, an insurance company compensated the owner for 50% of the loss. If the ship was destroyed due to war in the explored area, it compensated for 30% of the loss. In addition, the clone setting allowed all dead crew members to resurrect in the home port. At the same time, unlocked technology certificates and weapon drawings were not lost due to ship explosion. As long as there were sufficient funds, players could start from the mother star again in a short amount of time and set sail on their starship again. In addition to the starship being core to the game, Future Technology also designed many additional elements that are equally as entertaining. For example, high-end players could also set up mining companies, operate space stations, and even build their own space colonies to form a huge army with other players. However, considering the massive supplies required by the space colonies, generally only large companies had the ability to organize manpower to build facilities, while training soldiers to steal supplies and necessities from alien creatures, and also taking care of organizing transport fleets to and from the colonies and NPC-owned cities. In addition, for players not interested in exploring, they could also choose from a wide variety of professions, or focus on the development of characters. The players could even play the game as a first-person shooter or treat it as a role-playing game. The players could become a part of a mercenary and participate in a certain force's operations against alien creatures and other colonies, or they could become an adventurer into the unknown universe and pilot a fast and flexible single-person fighter to explore the mysteries of space or a planet that no one has ever set foot on. Galaxy Edge inherited the previous game design experience of Future Group with a focus on organic player ecosystem. Everything in the world existed in a dynamic setting, and evolved as players make choices in the game. This dynamic system matured in Godly Land, and after further upgrades from Lilith, the system improved further. After he had watched the 2 trailers and a 30-minute live demo, even Zhang Chen was itching to play. In addition to the live demo that made science fiction fans around the world eager to play, Future Technology finally announced the game was going online on May 31st. Based on the continuous success of Future Technology in large-scale VR online games, experts in the industry consensually gave very high ratings for the MERP yet to be launched. Even IGN, known for its critics in the industry, gave a rare 9.9 score to Galaxy Edge before the game even launched. As for the reason, the animation and music are impeccable, and the gameplay is something never been tried before. These are reflected in the actual demo, and we'll not go into details. Based on the past credibility of Future Technology, we have every reason to believe that the actual game experience will only be better than what is in the trailer. After watching the actual demo, we unanimously decided to give this game a high score of 9.9. If it turns out that our decision was wrong, I will eat both my helmet and keyboard. Chapter 1293, The Happy Lilith. An epic online adventure, Future Technology debuts another masterpiece, pushing the limits of games to the edge of the galaxy. No one can surpass this in 10 years unless it is another piece created by Future Technology. Zhang Chen sifted through the news and comments on Galaxy Edge with a grin while he was sitting down on the sofa. He then looked at Lilith. Your game is highly rated. Oh. Lilith, who was fighting in the fantasy world in her helmet, only gave a nonchalant response, and then continued to just lay there without a word. Aren't you curious about what the netizens said? Zhang Chen asked as he scrolled through the comments. At the start, Zhang Chen was still a little concerned as to whether Lilith could perfectly create the game design with code, but now, it seemed like his concern was excessive. In nearly 1,000 alpha tests, Not a single bug appeared, and for bugs that existed because of game design, they were quickly fixed with her help. In less than a week, Lilith not only completed the remaining development work but also upgraded the existing game development tools of Future Technology. Lilith's inhumane work efficiency was simply incredible. "I've seen them." Although her expression did not change, Zhang Chen could still feel that Lilith was in a good mood. As for why, he was not very clear. Probably just a feeling. In addition to Lilith's work, Future Technology employees were also capable. The carefully tailored trailers perfectly illustrated the charm at the edge of the galaxy to all the netizens around the world. With 500,000 limited edition game cabins worth $100,000 XND made available, they were instantly sold out by the next day. After all costs were removed, the sale generated a profit of more than $30 billion XND. Even when compared to the wealth Zhang Chen has already accumulated, the shocking profit still excited him. If it weren't for the product to be marketed as limited edition, the idea of making another 1 million units to satisfy the shopping desire of old and new money around the world really tempted Zhang Chen. There are more than 500 million potential players worldwide, and it is estimated that the number of people who will log into the game on the first day will exceed 300 million. Our promotion effort is very successful. As long as the quality of the game itself can reach 80% of the demo, this will become an inexhaustible goldmine. Today was a rest day. As she leisurely sat under the shade of the umbrella on the balcony, Xiaoshi reported her work while drinking her coffee. The actual demo only showed the tip of the iceberg. Zhang Chen smiled. 30 minutes is not enough to fully show the true beauty of Galaxy Edge. In order to continue to hype up players' expectations, we just simply went over a lot of features. I believe that when the players enter the game, they will be amazed by the countless unexpected surprises. Xiaoshi's lips also curved up after Zhang Chen finished explaining. She fixed the hair strands around her ear and jokingly said, "It's rare for you to be so invested in work." "I do work from time to time, okay?" Zhang Chen rolled his eyes and spread his hands helplessly. "It's just that my work is mainly concentrated on celestial trade. For Future Group, I have to count on you." "Speaking of which, what's going on in the Mars colony?" After Xiaoshi took another sip of the rich coffee, she gently placed the coffee cup on the plate and asked. "Mino 7-1 has been recovered, and more than 11 nests have been destroyed. The swarm's attack is gradually collapsing under the tires of our new equipment. Engineers have begun to strengthen the support structure of the ruins. The current progress is going well, and it won't be long before we can make the ruins of Gaia civilization reappear," Zhang Chen responded. "Is that so?" Xiaoshi's mood was also cheered up because of Zhang Chen's content mood. Then she added, "What about SS Origin?" "SS Origin? I remember 2 days ago that it safely passed the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. It is now moving towards Jupiter at 1,000th of the speed of light. Once it reaches Jupiter, Origin will try to use the slingshot effect to accelerate, and it theoretically can exceed the maximum speed threshold, but there are also risks involved with this decision. After all, no one knows whether the acceleration method applicable to small starships is applicable to large starships. Jupiter? It feels very far away." Xiaoshi gazed into the blue sky outside the umbrella and suddenly said with melancholy, "Is it far away?" "Their destination is even farther away. The Kuiper Belt, 30 astronomical units from Earth, 30 astronomical units." Xiaoshi looked to Zhang Chen. "How long does it take?" "About a year, maybe a little more. Only professionals will know." "I thought you were a professional." Xiaoshi had a grin as she joked. "Me? I'm a layman at most on technical problems." Zhang Chen laughed along. Once SS Origin arrived at Kuiper Belt, it would investigate the resources in the area. At the formation of the solar system, everything was concentrated here, especially water resources, helium-3, and metallic materials. Determining the distribution of these resources would provide considerable help for the future selection of the outer space defense fortress. In addition, Origin would also launch the newest observation satellite inside the Kuiper Belt, While deploying a research space station with 10 astronauts, the station would cooperate with scientists at the Space Command Center to carry out scientific research in the Kuiper Belt. A year was a long time, but for most of the crew on the Starship, it was just a matter of a blink. The hibernation chambers, especially, made interstellar navigation less dreadful. Right. I have always wanted to ask, did you decide to make Galaxy Edge as a promotion for Celestial Trade's space colony plan? That is part of the reason. Zhang Chen acknowledged the point. After all, the universe is still a very distant thing for most people. After the incident in Finland, people started to look up more, but that's not enough. To take our steps further, we must ignite everyone's desire for the brave new world. Zhang Chen then smiled. I think the game is a great choice. It just so happens that we also have the Phantom Helmet that can use VR to show the true beauty of the universe to people around the world. Chapter 1294, Galaxy Edge launched. On May 30th, with much anticipated expectations, Galaxy Edge's icon officially appeared in the list of Phantom applications. The icon was available after the application was preloaded. Based on the statistics of the Future Technology Operation Department, in less than an hour after the preload was made available, more than 50 million users preloaded the game and entered Galaxy Edge through their Phantom Helmet or VR game cabin. Future Technology was under extreme load due to the high amount of traffic. It responded by urgently adding a quantum computer as a server to alleviate the download demand. Fortunately, the signals of the 32 quantum communication satellites already covered all continents except for Antarctica. Otherwise, the huge data transmission may create another headache for Future Technology. In less than 2 hours, the number of preloaded users easily exceeded the 100 million mark, and the number still increased at an exponential rate. By noon, the number of users already reached an incredible 300 million. It was only till now did the upward trend ease. By the end of the preloading in the early hours of the day, the number of preloaded users worldwide reached an astounding 500 million. It seemed that there was no suspense for Galaxy Edge to break the record set by Godly World. However, for game designers, their tensed mind could not be rested before they witnessed this moment in person. The night outside the window was dark, but the meeting room on the 50th floor of the Future building was still lit. This meeting room was now occupied by the staff of the Galaxy Edge Project Department. Dozens of executives and technical backbones of the Planning Group, Operation Group, and Technical Support Group were sitting in front of the conference table. They nervously stared at the large holographic screen in front of the conference room. An hour after the end of the preload, that was, at 1 a.m. on May 31st, Galaxy Edge would officially launch, and all the eager players would flood into the game world they built. At that time, could the number of simultaneous online people break through the record set by the Godly World, and would their project create new glories for Future Technology? All the questions would be answered at that instant. Become a joke or become a legend, it was decided in this very moment. The project director went to the open window and lit his 12th cigarette for the day, which had reset its counter when the clock turned to 12 in midnight. The leader of the planning team rubbed his fingers repeatedly and circled around the conference room. The head of the operations had been to the toilet for the 7th time because he almost drank all the coffee in the conference room. Even the CEO of Future Technology, the veteran Ning Huajian, who had come all the way from Wanghai with Zhang Chen, also stood in this 50-square-meter conference room and accompanied his staff through this nervous and exciting moment. Finally, the clock on the wall of the conference room crossed the 1 o'clock moment. Almost instantly, the number on the holographic screen jumped from 0 to 10 million. Everyone's heart pumped violently when that number changed. But this was just the beginning. In just 1 minute, that number doubled. Everyone's heart jumped to their throat and never came down. 20 million. The number of online users exceeded 20 million in 1 minute. The number of simultaneous online users exceeded 50 million. It took 5 minutes. 100 million. 100 million. We broke the record. The leader of the operation group exclaimed. igniting the emotions of everyone in the meeting. Record-breaking. The legend that Godly World once created had been rewritten by their records. The number of online users on Galaxy Edge easily exceeded 100 million, and at this moment, the momentum was leaping toward 110 million. Server 1 is running normally. Turn on Server 2 now. The leader of the technical team called the technician in the server room, and his calm voice trembled with excitement. Enthusiasm was written all over his face, and when he saw the line on the holographic screen, the rock in Ning Huajian's heart finally dropped. He looked at his subordinates who were still fighting in their position and encouraged everyone in the room with a thrilled tone. Focus. Let's not fall asleep now. Haha. Who can sleep? This is more refreshing than analgesic oil. Lilith, who was on the sofa in the living room, was also closely following the numbers. Although she didn't say anything, Zhang Chen could still feel that as a game designer, she still cared about other people's evaluation of this game. Zhang Chen sat next to her and looked at the constantly growing number from the holographic screen hovering above her hand. An hour had passed. After the number of players broke through the 300 million mark, the increase had slowed down. When this number reached 350 million, Zhang Chen was both impressed and moved by this number. Our game has more people online than the third most populous country in the world. That's the data from 4 years ago. If you look at the latest population data, 350 million can be ranked in the top 5 in the world. Lilith corrected Zhang Chen with her usual emotionless state as a stream of data appeared in her eyes. Zhang Chen saw her look up slightly before she suddenly said, "A cyber attack was detected." Cyber attack? Zhang Chen looked away from the holographic screen, and began to yawn due to sleepiness before he casually said, "Get him." I've already started. Future Technology's sheer size now meant that it would attract countless attention, both positive and negative. Zhang Chen was not surprised that some people would have ill intentions on such a crucial day. He was not even surprised, let alone being worried. Not to mention that Lilith was sitting next to him. Even without this advanced artificial intelligence, the cybersecurity team of Future Technology could not be easily taken down by some second-tier attackers. That's it, the target terminal has exploded. A death sentence was issued lightly to the computer of the unscrupulous hacker, and Lilith continued expressionlessly. Their actual coordinates have been detected. Should we send a peace ambassador? No need, thank you. Looking at the expressionless Lilith, Zhang Chen subconsciously glanced at the direction of the study. He locked his suitcase there, and the nuclear button inside it was enough to destroy the world twice. I'm just making a suggestion, Lilith shrugged and said in a rare joking tone. You know, no matter how powerful computer technology is, it's impossible to break through physical isolation. If you make that joke again, I'll send you back. Zhang Chen glared at Lilith, speechless, and the latter opened her expression system and made a scared expression. However, Zhang Chen knew very well that this girl had absolutely no intention of introspection. It was really troublesome for the program to have thoughts and feelings. However, even Zhang Chen himself was surprised that compared to his original view, his current view on advanced artificial intelligence had been slightly changed because of Lilith's existence. Chapter 1295, Break One's Own Record. When Godly Land first came online, the Phantom helmet was still a rarity. Future Technology had never considered outsourcing or licensing the technology to other large manufacturers. Therefore, it was difficult for players to purchase helmets on the official website. Even for rich individuals, many players could only enjoy the games in the internet cafes partnered with Future Technology, and oftentimes there was a wait list. To a large extent, the low penetration rate of helmets had severely restricted the number of online users at the beginning of the 24-hour period. But even so, on the first day of launch, the record of 100 million concurrent users around the world easily broke a record set by a certain MOBA game. The launch of Galaxy Edge was bound to divert some players from Godly Land, but it was an expected outcome. No matter how fun the game, how rich the content, it was inevitable that players to grow weary of a game. When people lose their interest and start to feel bored with day-to-day mobs and endless tasks to complete, they were bound to start thinking about playing less or even leave the game, then find a new game to change things up. Galaxy Edge happened to provide this new option for these players. It was 3 in the morning. Lilith did not need to sleep, but Zhang Chen was already sleepy and couldn't stand it anymore. Based on the saying of the internet, those who were not asleep at this hour must be seeking to become greater beings. You're not going to sleep yet? Attracted by the light in the living room, Xiaoshu, who got up to use the bathroom, came down the stairs and walked up behind Zhang Chen. With her arms on the back of the sofa, she put her face over Zhang Chen's shoulders, looked at the holographic screen floating in front of him, and murmured with tired voice, "Well, it has reached 370 million. It's estimated that its peak is 400 million. Aren't you surprised?" Zhang Chen turned his face slightly, and smiled. "I was looking forward to seeing a startled expression on your face. I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." Xiaoshu's lips curved up to form a gentle sleepy smile. "When we met 3 days ago, we made predictions on this data and reserved server resources based on the data." "Oh, what is the number of players you predicted?" Zhang Chen smiled. "The daily average is probably at around 100 million. As for the peak number, if you don't consider expansions and in-game events, it is probably the number you will see." Not surprisingly, it should be about 400 million. Xiaoshu gave a fairly conservative estimate to Zhang Chen, but even a conservative estimate was a pretty staggering number. Future technology's creation could only be broken by future technology. After tonight, this record would once again shock the world. Early the next morning, the Wall Street Journal gave a rare headline to an online game. "The VR game industry hits a new high again. The peak of the global concurrent players on Galaxy Edge exceeded the total population of the population exceeded 400 million in 2020, and as of 4 a.m. on May 31st, the number of online users had already exceeded the 400 million mark with the influx of players from other time zones. Like the time when Godly Lan went online, the capital world had once again set their sight on the masterpiece created by future technology after a gap of 4 years. In this era where traffic is king, this astounding number of players meant money. Wall Street analysts valued Galaxy Edge at more than $100 billion. Whether this valuation was accurate or justified remained a debate. But the valuation was just the tip of the iceberg for the capsule world's interest in this game. It was not just the Wall Street Journal. 80% of the world's media, on the first day of June, reported on the miracles created by Galaxy Edge. On the official website of Galaxy Edge, hundreds of articles on game strategies and experiences in different languages appeared in the newly opened official forums. These strategies were usually compiled by high-end amateur players, while professional players were still struggling in the game world at this moment. Because there was no internal test on Galaxy Edge, naturally there were no internal beta players with first-hand information. Everyone was in the exploration stage of this game, and everyone's starting point was the same. Whether someone could create a gap with other players was dependent on the first 24 hours. In order to respond to emergencies and urgently repair possible bugs, the staff of Future Technology was almost next to their computers and servers in shifts, as they meticulously monitored all the news in-game and on official forum in real time. Soon, it was noon, and the team leader who had just brewed himself his 14th cup of coffee returned to the conference room. It just happened to be at this moment, the staff of the operation team around the computers exclaimed, "What happened?" The team leader walked up to the staff with his coffee in hand. As he looked at the laptop screen, the page on the screen was the official forum of Galaxy Edge. In the chat section of the official forum, a post gained tens of thousands of visitors in just 10 minutes. The first Seagull-class starship in the game, not much to say, just see it yourself. After he saw the title of the post, the team leader took a second to process this information before he snagged the mouse, and scrolled down to look at the post below it. What the... good lord, is this your ship? This is insane. It only took this long before the first 500,000 ton starship is created. I don't read much, so don't lie to me. The cost of a Seagull class is at least 10 million credits. The game has just been launched for 12 hours. How come you have tens of millions of credit points? I just completed a hidden reward task, and it only rewarded me with 200,000 credits. Lily requesting to play with you. Height 160 centimeters, weight 49 kilograms. My location is Wanghai. At admin, come out and meet God himself. I just want to know, is this a hack? The commenter above must have been kicked by a donkey. When did a hack ever exist in a future technology game? How many years have Godly Land been running? Have you heard of hacks? Is it an NPC ship? No, it doesn't look like it. If it is an NPC ship, the flag should be the Earth Federation flag. Someone posted a picture on the official forum. The first Seagull-class starship has been created. It was posted in the Mandarin section of the forum. It should be a player in Hua's region. Zhao Zhang looked at his team leader and said with a serious expression. The team leader frowned. Based on the settings of the game, all players had an empty, single-person aircraft at the start. They could mount a mining module to mine, install an attack module to participate in story missions to obtain credit points in the battle with interstellar pirates, or head to the colonies of the Earth Confederation to participate in ground warfare. According to normal game flow, players could get their first 100,000-ton starship after 72 hours of game time and start their own Star Trek journey. A 500,000-ton Seagull. It was undoubtedly a bit too powerful for the start of the game. Even if he had complete faith in his colleagues at the technical team to not make any mistake, he could not help himself but to suspect that a major bug appeared in the game. With this thought in his mind, he did not dare to hesitate, immediately took out his phone, and called the technical team leader. Chapter 1296. Exceeding expectations. When the news reached Zhang Chen, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Zhang Chen was also confused about how the players in Hua region created a Seagull class within 12 hours. Zhang Chen came to see Lilith, who was lying on the sofa and observing each player, and asked her about it. Lilith quickly answered his confusion. The player who built the first Seagull-class starship is the chairman of an online gaming club called Honor of Souls. This club has been focusing on future technology games since its establishment 4 years ago. The club has more than 100 employees and more than 1,000 members. The club has been active since the earliest New Era mobile game, and has grown to its current size, and even registered its own homepage and forum. Zhang Chen immediately understood what had happened. This situation was also common in other games. At the beginning of the game, everyone's funds would be concentrated on a few core members. Then these members quickly leave Tutorial Island and secure the top positions on the leaderboard. Once they've established their own clan, they would go back and give resources to the players who initially contributed to them. In online games that emphasized economy and resources, such as Galaxy Edge, the benefits of being able to own a transport ship in the early stages were undoubtedly huge. At this moment, no player had switched their profession to pirate, and trips between cities of the Earth Federation could easily accumulate a large amount of funds and continue to expand their advantages. Although this playstyle would somewhat disrupt the game's balance, it was within the allowable range of the game rules, so the operation team did not intervene. In fact, I had thought it was your ship. Zhang Chen, who had understood what was going on, looked at Lilith on the sofa and joked. Participating from the beginning of the game would affect the balance too much. I will go in after half a year to see. Now I am focusing on Godly Land. Lilith, with the helmet on, said emotionlessly. Compared to being the #1 player in the game or getting some kind of achievement, she emphasized on the game itself, especially the fun of participating in human social activities. After all, monetary gains or personal honors were meaningless for an advanced artificial intelligence. Simply put, her gaming attitude was more similar to casual players, except she was the overpowered kind of casual player. As of the morning of June 2nd, the Operation Department reported the data they had obtained on several well-known virtual product trading platforms around the world. The exchange rate between credit points used by Galaxy Edge and Zin New Dollars was almost speculated to a price of 51, and often there was no supply. Obviously, the millionaires and major professional clubs in the world were stimulated by the miracle of the Hua region player who built the first Seagull-class starship in 12 hours. Therefore, they invested heavily in order to create their own first 500,000-ton starship. In terms of players, the statistics reported by the operation department were much higher than Ziyash's prediction. The average daily number of online users worldwide exceeded more than 150 million. The insights generated by the operation team's analytics concluded that it may be related to the recent development of space resources, which happened to be a hot global topic. After Zhang Chen told Lilith to oversee Galaxy Edge's progress, he quickly refocused his work on celestial trade. Just 2 days ago, a cargo ship full of arms had set off from Mange Island to Madagascar in southern Africa. Since the fall of the Rothschild family, Madagascar's political situation had been under the control of celestial trade. At this moment, in the military base celestial trade had snatched from Marrow Company, more than 10,000 mercenaries of different skin colors had been assembled. These people were all outside of Celestial Trade's establishment, however, they were considered Celestial Trade's foreign reserve. Celestial Trade's regional influence had been gradually expanding since the Dnieper offensive in Ukraine last year. Therefore, Celestial Trade can no longer use the name of a private military contractor as a cover for diplomatic immunity. No one was stupid, and the international community gradually recognized Celestial Trade as the armed forces of Sin. Under such circumstances, if Celestial Trade decided to parachute soldiers with kinetic skeleton from the synchronous orbit to another country, it would have to withstand diplomatic and political pressure from the international community. As a result, these non-staff personnel, who were originally regarded as reservists at foreign military bases, once again had a part to play. These mercenaries were mostly African with a small number of white natives of Madagascar or South Africa. For those who were living below the poverty line, the citizenship of Zin and the official employee status of Celestial Trade were two things they dreamt of. They were willing to risk their lives on their pursuit. Although they were not protected by kinetic skeleton, and they could not use the Reaper assault rifle with superior functionality, the E-level genetic vaccine had already brought them a lot of advantages. Future military had also designed some low recognition but quite practical high-tech equipment for them to enhance their combat effectiveness and battlefield survivability. The size of this unit was less than 20,000, and it usually appeared in hotspots around the world. It performed some dirty work that was not convenient for Celestial Trade's regular army to execute. For example, their next stop was Syria, as an exchange of interests between Celestial Trade and Russia on South American issues. They did not need to abide by international law and humanitarianism. They would use the simplest and most straightforward methods to bring down extreme terrorists and less extreme opposition. If they were unlucky, they might have to fight the Turkish army. Of course, the unlucky ones were the Turkish army. Inside the mansion's study, after Aisha knocked on the door gently, she walked to Zhang Chen's desk. Yarif asked when we would be ready to start. He is ready. A railway in northern Saudi Arabia can help transport our people and equipment to the Jordanian coast from the Red Sea coast. After entering eastern Jordan, there will be an arms dealer familiar with the local matter. He will guide us through the no man's land to southern Syria. After he had put down a report on the Mars colony development, he looked to Aisha, who was standing in front of his desk, thought for a moment, and then said, "Tell him not to worry. Our people have already assembled in Madagascar. When the election enters its final stage, our people will board the ship and head to the Red Sea. By the end of the election, the new and old government will begin to transfer power, and we will have dealt with all of the troubles in Syria." Among all the options Zhang Chen could think of, this had the least impact on the situation. If Kennedy Jr. was finally elected, the A would willingly restore relations with Zin and join the Earth Defense Alliance unconditionally. He was also happy to let go of his past differences and set his sights on the longer-term future. At that time, In order to minimize the differences between the two countries in international affairs, the best way was to solve the problems that were most likely to cause differences between before Mr. Kennedy Jr. completes the transfer of power. Chapter 1297, The Warning from the Opposition. At 10 in the morning, Zhang Yaping's chief of staff visited Zhang Chen's mansion. Because there were guests coming, Lilith finally left the sofa and went to the balcony with her helmet. Xiaoshu was working at Future Building while Natasha went to the embassy as usual. As the only hostess of the mansion, Aisha made black tea for the two and then stood behind Zhang Chen. This tall and lean chief of staff seemed quite careful. After the last chief of staff of the presidential palace finished their term, it was the first time the new chief of staff visited this place on behalf of the president. At the inaugural dinner of President Zhang, he and Zhang Chen greeted each other, but this was the first formal exchange. In the living room, the chief of staff explained his intentions. President Zhang is on a diplomatic visit to South America, so he couldn't be here in person. Therefore, I'm visiting on his behalf. I know. Zhang Chen smiled, looked at the chief of staff and then said, "Don't be so nervous, make yourself comfortable." The chief of staff smiled, his stiff shoulders relaxed slightly, and after a pause, he spoke. At the Kyoto Olympics in August this year, we expect to send 210 athletes to participate. President Zhang wants me to ask you for your opinion on attending the opening ceremony. In general, the decision for leaders to attend the opening ceremony also reflected the diplomatic relations between the two countries. On issues that involved diplomatic strategy, Zhang Yaping usually asked for Zhang Chen's opinion. For example, Zhang Yaping's visit to South America was carried out under the direction of Zhang Chen. On the surface, it was to push for Zin's enterprises in the South American market. In fact, it was a strategy designed to pave the way for Celestial's global power grid to enter us backyard. Zhang Chen responded with a polite smile, and said softly, "I don't have any opinions. Since they have been actively seeking to participate in the Earth Defense Alliance and corrected the mistakes they have made, then we might as well show some appreciation." The chief of staff was slightly caught off guard, but he quickly smiled too. "I understand what you mean. Is there anything else?" Zhang Chen asked with ease as he leaned back into the sofa while looking at the chief of staff. "There is one more thing." With a nod, the chief of staff's expression turned more serious. "Just 2 hours ago, we secretly met with the confidants of the opposition leader in Colombia at the Zin embassy in Ecuador. With economic growth brought by the global power grid and the promise of another space elevator, Ecuador was the only South American country friendly to Zin and celestial trade." Zhang Chen was not surprised that the Colombian opposition was able to enter Ecuador and meet the delegation of Zin. What really surprised Zhang Chen was that the Colombian opposition chose to contact them during this sensitive period. "Oh?" Zhang Chen responded as a frown slowly formed. "What did he say?" "He brought a warning from the Colombian opposition." With a solemn look, the chief of staff said, "The CIB is planning a murder against President Zhang." According to the information he provided, a Mexican drug cartel and a Colombian will be involved in the murder, and it is expected to take place when the Zin delegation arrives in Colombia, and this will be planted on the Colombian conservatives. There was a moment of shock that appeared in Zhang Chen's pupils, then he turned to Aisha, who was behind him. Aisha responded to his look by shaking her head gently, indicating that she had not received any intelligence. Zhang Chen then focused on the chief of staff again. His index finger lightly tapped on the armrest of the sofa and fell into contemplation. It was a serious accusation to state that the CIB was planning the murder of President Zhang. If the situation turned out to be true, it may potentially escalate into a war between the two countries. However, there were two doubts that troubled Zhang Chen. How could the Colombia opposition party possess intelligence that even the ghost agents did not receive? If the information was true, then another question would arise. Why would the CIB choose to strike Zin's leader at this time? Is the Colombian opposition lying? In order to prevent contact between Zin and the current Colombian government, there was indeed such a possibility, and the possibility was not small. After all, The life and death of the Colombian opposition depended entirely on Celestial Trade's attitude towards the current Colombian government. The one party that did not want Zin's delegation to visit Colombia was the opposition party, ready to revolt. But do they really dare to lie? With these thoughts in mind, Jiang Qin's frown turned deeper. He felt there was more to this. Seeing that Jiang Qin was not responding, the chief of staff gently coughed and asked, President Jiang asked me to seek for your opinion on whether we should adjust the delegation's visit to Colombia. Generally, in situations like this, it was always better to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Even if they wouldn't cancel the visit to Colombia, the visit time would be adjusted. However, after pondering for a while, Jiang Qin's reply was beyond the expectations of the chief of staff. I will increase the security forces around him so that he does not have to worry. You mean, itinerary will not adjusted. This. Although hesitant, the chief of staff still nodded reluctantly. Okay. The meeting was over. Jiang Qin sent the chief of staff to the door. As Jiang Qin waited for the vehicle to drive away, he looked at Aisha at the entrance. What do you think? There are too many suspicious points, Aisha whispered. This year is the election year in the even if they want to provoke a war, they will not choose this time. In addition, if it is the Hill government, they are now shifting their strategy to a conservative one, and it is unlikely that they will make such a risky move. Jiang Qin nodded. He shared the same thought. He did not think that after facing countless failures, the SIB would still be so certain that their plan would not be discovered by ghost agents. Just a few months ago during the spy war in Nippon, they should have thoroughly learned the true strength of ghost agents. Is it Morgan? No, it's impossible. Although they would become the beneficiary of the war, they were definitely not referring to a war with unclear outcomes or even consequences that they could not bear. I will immediately send someone to South America to investigate this matter, and at the same time be responsible for protecting Zhang Yaping's safety, Aisha said softly. The investigation is going to have to trouble you. As for President Zhang's safety. As he spoke, Jiang Qin looked up toward the balcony above the mansion, and a smile suddenly formed. I know just the right person. Chapter 1298, Strange Events. South America, Zin Embassy in Ecuador. Because of the time difference, it was still late at night. Zhang Yaping finished the meeting with the representatives of the Colombian opposition, and without having the time to take off his suit, he was pacing back and forth in the reception room while constantly looking up at the clock on the wall. The moment he learned that someone was planning his murder, and it was being plotted by the infamous SIB, he was furious and shocked. Although it was not the first he received a death threat, it was the first time he received a death threat from a third country during his diplomatic visit. Finally tired from pacing around, he walked to the sofa in the reception room and sat down. Pressing his fingers on his temples, Zhang Yaping closed his eyes with a headache. While digesting a mess of emotions, he suddenly had a moment of realization as his closed eyes opened, showing a color of confusion. Why me? It would be impossible for the SIB to not be aware of the political environment of Zin. Although Zin supported a universal suffrage system, everyone was aware that without the support of Celestial Trade, he would not be able to win this election. With the support of big data, Future Group could accurately push specific news to specific people. Under such circumstances, even if everyone was satisfied with their vote, the final result of the vote would match the interest of Celestial Trade. To put it bluntly, he was a puppet of Celestial Trade. What would be the use of assassinating a puppet? If he died in South America, the vice president would immediately be able to take over in Zin. Other than causing the people of Zin to mourn and be angry, his death would not cause any disruption to the stable political environment in Zin. Does the SIB want to provoke a war? Filtering through these thoughts, Zhang Yaping revealed an odd expression. If all conditions were to be met, the most likely answer obtained was the least likely possibility. Just then, his assistant knocked on the door of the reception room and walked in quickly with the phone. Sir, it's a call from the presidential palace. Snatching the phone from his assistant, Zhang Yaping hurriedly asked, What did he say? The voice on the other end of the phone hesitated and then responded in a quiet voice. He said he will increase the security around you. So you don't have to worry. How can I not worry? With his face gradually turning pale, Zhang Yaping gulped. That is to say, the itinerary for visiting Colombia remains unchanged? Yes. He hung up the phone. Collapsing into the sofa, Zhang Yaping looked at the phone in his hand with a wry smile and threw it to the assistant, who hurriedly caught it. Mr. President? The assistant looked at him with some worry. It's nothing. Zhang Yaping loosened the tie around his neck and waved at him. Go do your thing. Yes. The assistant nodded respectfully and turned to leave the room. The reception room had returned to its previous silence. Inside the empty room, Zhang Yaping buried his face between his palms, took a deep breath, and sighed with a headache. This is pushing me into the fire pit. Early the next morning, at the suburb of Langley, near the capital, was the SIB building during working hours. It was as busy as ever. A SIB agent in a suit knocked on the director's door and then walked in. He went to Henry Wilmot, who was drinking coffee and reading newspapers. What's the matter, my dear Mr. Baird? Without taking his eyes away from the newspaper, Henry asked in a relaxed tone as he read the latest report on the election on the Washington Post. Since Kerry's defeat, he had nothing to do. Since he already made a mistake for choosing a side once, he did not plan to make another mistake. As long as Hill, who he sabotaged previously, did not get elected, he could stand in the middle and not make any enemies. As for the historical grudges of the Kennedy family and the SIB, they all belong to the older generation. Well, tell me what happened to make you look so wry so early in the morning? Henry put down the newspaper, then noticed the serious expression on his top staff, and his own expression also gradually became more serious. We were informed by our informant in Venezuela that recently a batch of Russian-made weapons came ashore from the port of La Cruz and we lost track of it after it was being transported to Venezuela with trucks, Baird reported seriously, then placed two reports on the table. Russian weapon, Venezuela? Henry was processing the information. Does Russia have any core interests in South America? They haven't even solved the problems near them and now they are still thinking about South America that is tens of thousands of kilometers away from Moscow. Don't fool me. This is not the 60s or the 70s. Can we trace the origin of this shipment? Henry asked in a low voice after a moment of pondering. We are tracking this shipment's origin now. The latest information we've obtained is that it is from a port located in Greece, but it is very likely that this shipment never landed in Greece at all and were just attached with the official seal of the Greek customs. It doesn't matter where it originated. I hope it's not from Coral Island. Cussing in a low voice, Henry glanced at another report on the table and put aside the issue that he could not make sense of. Report the latest developments to me immediately. Also, keep an eye on Celestial Trade's recent international movements. I'll put this question aside first, and I noticed that there is one more report. Yes, Baird nodded solemnly. Another piece of bad news. Just this morning we received intelligence that Agent Braddock, who was sent to Colombia last month, lost contact with us early yesterday morning. Lost contact? Henry frowned. Can you confirm his current security situation? Baird shook his head. In his residence, we found no evidence of fighting. However, when our people arrived, he had disappeared. There is no evidence of fighting? How is this possible? Henry wondered. Henry was aware of Agent Braddock, known as the SIB Hound. He had more than 10 years of experience in field intelligence work, with the director being well aware of his name. He was certainly a tough individual. Without any resistance, an experienced senior SIB agent was taken down. Even if the kidnapper possessed power of 007 and Tom Cruise, it shouldn't be that easy, right? I also think this is quite strange. With Agent Braddock's strength, it is impossible for him to be kidnapped without resistance. After a pause, Baird, with a complex and complicated expression, added, At present, we have contacted the Colombian police through the embassy to search for the whereabouts of Agent Braddock as a missing citizen, but so far, we have not received any useful information from Colombia. It is hopeless to count on the Colombian police. They can't even solve their own problems. With a serious frown, Henry thought for a moment, then looked to Baird. What is the mission Agent Braddock handled before his disappearance? Tracking down a batch of drugs imported from Florida and a drug cartel active in Colombia and Panama, Baird replied immediately. A drug cartel? Henry was dumbfounded again. If he was kidnapped while following KGB agents or ghost agents, he could understand. However, a drug cartel? How is that possible? What was with today? How come strange things were happening one after another? Henry subconsciously looked at the calendar on the corner of the table, and his eyebrows twisted together. Damn it, today is not April Fool's Day either. Chapter 1299, The Rats in the Ditch. The moonlight was pristine. On the border between Ecuador and Colombia, an off-road vehicle colored in military green was parked on a hilly slope. A dense tropical rainforest faced the hill, and a river only about knee-deep bisected the rainforest into two. One side was Ecuador while the other side was Colombia. An Ecuadorian soldier carrying a rifle jumped down from the vehicle, took 2 steps forward, then used his binoculars to examine the situation on the Colombia side. After he had confirmed that no border guards were patrolling the area, he turned back to the off-road vehicle, opened the door for the man sitting in the car, and said with his cigar-flavored Spanish, "Border is in the front. There is a Colombian town about 2 kilometers away. You can take a bus to the nearby city. It's best if you cross as soon as possible. Also, remember to be careful of the patrol lights from helicopters and the crocodiles of the swamp." "Thank you, I will." After bearded man got off the car, he smiled slightly and thanked the soldier. The Ecuadorian soldier grinned. "You are welcome. Our friends' guests are naturally our guests." In principle, Ecuador and Colombia, as friendly neighbors, should not give the green light to the Colombian opposition. There were exceptions to everything, however, especially given Ecuador and Celestial Trade's honeymoon phase. Tempted by the check of another space elevator, most of the requirements put forward by Zinn could be guaranteed, even if the requirements compromised diplomatic principles. With a meaningful smile, Hearst nodded without responding. He picked up his backpack from the back seat of the off-road vehicle, threw it on his back, and walked toward the border under the watch of the soldier. Stepping across the river, he walked across 1 kilometer of the tropical rainforest. Then he dragged out his motorcycle from the bushes and dropped his backpack on it. The roar of the engine alarmed the lizard lying on the tree, and the crocodile by the shoal raised its eyelids slightly. After he hopped on the motorcycle, he confirmed the direction using the scattered moonlight and then drove straight to the Colombian town not far from the border. Time gradually passed, and soon it was deep into the night. Hearst stopped in front of a warehouse at an abandoned farm. He locked the motorcycle in front of the door, glanced at the pitch-dark warehouse, and opened the rusty iron gate. Not knowingly, a gun protruded out of the shadow, and it was pressed against his face. With a grin, Hearst raised his hands above his head and said impatiently, "It's me." As soon as he said those words, the beard faded from his face at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. The muscles on his face seemed to be wriggling like boiled water, followed by the cracking sound of his bones. Hearst's look had completely changed. The muzzle against his face slowly lowered. Hearst lowered his raised hands and complained towards the shadows. "Is this necessary? Special times, forgive me," the man said in a hoarse voice. Shrugging off the comment, Hearst followed the man and walked deep into the warehouse. They bypassed an agricultural machine, and in the corner of the warehouse, he saw a beam of light leaking from the wooden door. The beam of light was very fragile and wavered in the darkness, like a boat swaying in the eye of the storm. It was as if it could disappear in the wave in any second. To some extent, its situation was very similar to the current curfew. 2 years ago, the tragedies of City K and Yodo shocked the world. It directly led to the loss of hundreds of thousands of people and the ousting of the two regimes. For the first time, the word T-virus appeared in front of the eyes of all the countries in the world, and the world was caught in an unprecedented panic. In December of the same year, NATO launched a large-scale military operation in northwest Somalia under the auspices of the United Nations. With concrete evidences, nations declared war on the warlords and set off another sandstorm in Somalia. In less than a month, The Iron Fist from the civilized world destroyed the warlords who provided support to the Kurafune and took over the infected area and the T-virus factory on the border between Ethiopia and Somalia. At the beginning of the following month, Celestial Trade sent troops without authorization to launch an assault in Kenya, destroying the only 1.7 tons left out of the 50 tons of virus stock solution, eradicating everything the Kurafune accumulated over the past decades. One bad news came one after another, and Tanaka, the spiritual leader of the organization, also lost contact after a duel with Zhang Chen. Even the most senior member of the Kurafune was only aware that he last appeared in the suburbs of Yodo, not knowing whether he was still alive or not. Only Tanaka was able to communicate with the Kurafune. Losing Tanaka meant that they completely lost contact with the Black Ship. In the confusion and fear of losing the unity, the members of the Kurafune were either exhausted by the global pursuit of ghost agents or hiding in a remote area under a different name. It didn't take long for Celestial Trade to build a space elevator, which began to emerge internationally, and its strength expanded at a geometric speed. In the shadow of Zhang Chen, they trembled like mice in the gutter, and they didn't dare to look squarely at this behemoth, let alone seek revenge. Hurst was no different. As a senior member of the Kurafune, he was not only pursued by ghost agents but also topped the wanted list of various countries as a terrorist. But because of his ability to change his appearance and height at will, he barely escaped the intelligence organizations. Hurst, who fled to South America, wandered in loneliness and confusion for 2 years and lived a semi-reclusive life while carefully paying attention to the news of the Kurafune. However, the cruel facts were stated in front of him. Other than news of Kurafune members being arrested or accidentally killed, he could not find any useful information in the newspapers and the internet. Just when he was almost in a state of despair, he saw the mark left by members of the Kurafune from a newspaper. Overjoyed, he quickly found a companion hiding in Colombia based on the clues left in the newspaper. Not only he escaped the pursuit of the ghost agents, but 3 other companions did as well. Psychic Andrew from Britain, the mercenary Jirak, and a person named Sakai with the ability to read minds. What if they change their itinerary, or simply end their South America visit? Jirak asked in a hoarse voice while wiping the sniper rifle in his hand. They can't change the itinerary. Andrews smiled. They are Celestial Trade. The SIB is not enough to make them back down. And it won't happen even with FBA involved, and their arrogance will make them pay a painful price for this. I hope everything goes well. Hurst drew the Kurafune mark on his chest and closed his eyes religiously. I also hope that the sacrifice we offer is enough to show our loyalty to our Lord. I just want to avenge Mr. Tanaka, Sakai said with hatred-filled eyes hidden under his long hair and sitting in the corner with his arms folded. We will. Andrew's smile was very gentle as if he were a kind priest facing a lost lamb. My Lord will bless us to victory. If the blood of the immortal people could be exchanged for the favor of our Lord and usher in eternal evolution for this decaying world, no matter how many sacrifices, it'll be worth it. This was all because all life will finally gain eternity in glorious harmony. World War III. This offering should be enough. With this thought in mind, Andrew reached out his skinny right hand and touched the pendant on his chest. He looked at the tied-up citizen who was twisting in the corner, and his dark green pupils flashed with fanatic colors. Chapter 1300, Who Could Fall Asleep? Early the next morning, Lilith went to the airport. When she left, she did not bring any luggage. She only asked Zhang Chen to prepare a ticket for her from Coro to Bogota. Aisha wondered if the empty-handed Lilith was really capable of such a serious task. But after Zhang Chen gently combed her chestnut hair, she no longer questioned and timidly chose to believe Zhang Chen's decision. The mansion once again returned to the long-absent four-people state. You sent such a little girl across the globe to carry out a mission. Is that really okay? Sat at the dining table and biting off a large sandwich filled with vegetables, salad dressing, and bacon, Natasha, who was enjoying her lunch, asked Zhang Chen with a muffled voice. Why not? Zhang Chen just shrugged and answered nonchalantly. Compared to Lilith, I'm more curious about how many seconds those who try to challenge my bottom line can last." Is that powerful?" Natasha looked at Zhang Chen suspiciously while her mouth, that was about to bite the sandwich, opened wider in surprise. Zhang Chen sighed softly while the chopsticks in his hand stopped at the side of the bowl, and his eyes drifted towards the ceiling. In terms of individual combatability, if everyone in this room worked together, perhaps it would be a tie. In fact, Zhang Chen omitted the fact that if the safety program added on Lilith's brain was not in place, he could not think of a way to beat her in a fight. The liquid metal's operability was simply too powerful. Lilith even showed him how to turn the liquid metal into a Gauss rifle. Modeling and framing, it'd be completed in an instant. The liquid metal could be transformed into a shield at close combat, and it could be transformed into an electromagnetic pulse cannon in far-range combat. With its computing power, it was simply unbeatable. Although Natasha still had doubts about Zhang Chen's statement, she reluctantly accepted his statement. Just that when she thought of the enemy that little girl would face, she couldn't help but feel nervous for her. However, her opponent is the SIB, Natasha shrugged and teased. Those people will not be merciful because of her age. When did you assume the SIB is stronger than me? He rolled his eyes, then continued with a casual tone, and, do you really think the SIB is crooked? Isn't it? Natasha asked back. Natasha, who had left the Russian intelligence system, was now completely transferred to the diplomatic system as a security advisor to the Russian embassy in Xin. It was debatable if Russia, who was in the midst of a political coup in Colombia, detected anything abnormal. It was realistic for a former agent located tens of thousands of kilometers away to know anything. Of course, the Russian security services did not receive any news, and it happened to confirm Zhang Chen's guess. Both ghost agents and the Russian security services did not receive any intelligence of the assassination plans, but these plans were seen by the Colombian opposition in advance and they warned the president of Xin who was visiting Ecuador. No matter how one thought about it, it seemed incredible and improbable at the same time. However, the trouble was that this matter could not be verified. Now the coup of the Revolutionary Army had entered the final preparation stage. Basically, the combatants were either hiding in the mountains or lurking in the shadows. At this point in time, even the Russian security services, who was responsible for supporting the coup, may not be able to find the leader of the Revolutionary Army hiding in the mountains. Even if they could locate him, it would certainly be too late, because Zhang Yaping would visit the Colombian capital just 3 days later. Will we know in a few days? Zhang Chen glanced at the clock on the wall. In 3 or 4 days or at most 1 week. The delegation of Xin will not stay in Colombia for too long. Therefore, if those people really planned on doing something, then their opportunity window would be the next 4 days. Now Lilith's plane should have taken off. With no direct flights from Coro City to Colombia, counting the transit time, the trip should take her about 30 hours in total. Assuming no delays, Lilith should arrive in the Colombian capital Bogotá early in the morning tomorrow. Zhang Chen was inexplicably worried after he thought about the itinerary. Is it really okay for Lilith to go so far away alone and get off the plane in the middle of the night? But soon, he was amused by his thoughts. What a joke. Lilith is the advanced artificial intelligence of the 22nd century. It must take at least a division to threaten her. Because Lilith was not there, the small third wheel was no longer there. During the quiet night, Zhang Chen, Aisha, and Zayasha finally had some fun outside the bedroom. From the gym to the bathroom to the bedroom, after 2 moans filled with joy and sweat, the 3 people slept in each other's arms. Although Zayasha's bottom line had been slowly lowered by Zhang Chen's constant pleas, it seemed that being with Aisha was her bottom line. But even so, Zhang Chen was already very satisfied. If there was another person, he was afraid he could not handle the situation. As for the sweet harem dream, while he was curious, he was not eager to make it a reality. He would just go with the flow. Early the next morning, listening to the uniform breathing in his ears, Zhang Chen opened his eyes. The 2 women were still asleep. A smile formed as he glanced over to see Aisha and Zayasha snuggling together like kittens. He gently kissed the forehead of each girl, Then he quietly crawled out of the bed. Before he left the room, he tucked them in again. Although the exercise last night took a lot of his energy, he felt almost completely recovered this morning. Other than the soreness in his shoulders, he didn't feel any fatigue at all. Instead, he felt refreshed. After washing up in the bathroom, Zhang Chen came to the kitchen obediently and prepared breakfast for the two women who were still asleep. Of course, this may be an overstatement. After all, he only heated up the bacon sandwiches from yesterday. But did it matter? Zhang Chen's mood was lightened by Aisha's happy smile as he sat at the dining table and watched her happily bite into a sandwich. A bright smile emerged on Zhang Chen's face. However, for some odd reason, Zhang Chen, who showed such a smile, was not well received by Natasha. She responded by giving him a dirty look. After she expressed her slight discontent, Natasha, who sat diagonally across from him, was yawning profusely while she stuffed the sandwich into her mouth. Zhang Chen thought she slept early last night, but he seemed to sense that she was not in a good mental state. Could it be that she stayed up yesterday? If Natasha knew what he was thinking, he would definitely get 2 punches. You guys were so loud, who could fall asleep?